bin auch mal da. Ein bisschen später als geplant, aber auch nicht wirklich. Ich habe ja gesagt 18 bis 19. Darum passt es eigentlich schon. Ich mache noch kurz einen Twitter-Post. Bup. Jetzt, wo ich keinen Starting Screen mehr habe, äh, muss ich das jetzt wieder immer machen, wie wir es am Anfang gemacht haben in der Anfangszeit, dass ich immer am Anfang kurz mal äh, gucke, aber eigentlich ist es ja egal. Bup. Yo, Mitachi. So, Twitter-Post ist dann. Genau. Ich habe ein paar Videos rausgesucht. Die Beleuchtung ist heute furchtbar. Naja, egal. Ich mache ja eh gleich. Schalte ja gleich um. Ich habe ein paar Videos rausgesucht. Die sind alle extra ein bisschen länger. Sind jetzt nicht irgendwie, keine Ahnung, mega krasse Themen zu was auch immer. Gott und der Welt, sondern einfach nur passend zum Stream irgendwas, ne? Was mir auf der For You-Page vorgeschlagen wurde. Ähm, ja. Habe ich ein paar in der Playliste gepackt. Ein paar haben wir schon geguckt vor ein paar Monaten. Ich gucke gerade, ob es von den alten noch was gibt. Ich denke nicht. Ist auch alles ein bisschen veraltet mittlerweile schon, darum ja. Jo, Flavio. Hoffe, euch geht's allen gut. Ja, und selbst wenn. Also es sind jetzt nicht mega viele Videos, die ich hier eingepackt habe, aber ich habe noch Reserve. Ein paar. Ich gucke mal, mit welchem wir anfangen. Ich würde sagen, dem hier. Das ist ein Smash-Video. Smash-Video oder Smash haben wir generell nicht so viel gemacht hier. Whoop. Whoop. Ja, ich muss hier kurz mal. Bap. Muss wegen Audio gucken, das hätte ich vielleicht vorher machen sollen. Bla. Ich glaube, Audio ist okay, oder? Für mich ein bisschen laut, aber für euch sollte es gehen. I hope.
Well, I don't have anything better to do. Super Smash Bros.
Genau, also, ne, hab jetzt keine Themen für Gott und die Welt. Also ich habe ein Smash-Video, ein Pokémon-Video, ein Mario Kart-Video, wobei ich nicht weiß, ob wir das gucken. Ähm, beziehungsweise sogar zwei Pokémon-Videos. Ähm, dann habe ich noch einen anderen Shiny and Over. Oh, up. Danke. Wo ist der Counter? Hier. Ich dachte, hatte ich ein eigener Szene gemacht, aber nee. Okay, danke. Ja, ich habe zwei Pokémon-Video, ein Mario Kart-Video, wobei ich nicht weiß, ob ich das gucke zusammen. Mal sehen. Ähm, und noch einen Kanal, beziehungsweise zwei, die man gucken könnte, ein paar Videos. Ich denke, die haben doch kein Problem, weil jedenfalls der eine macht sehr unregelmäßig Videos und die letzten sind, glaube ich, schon 2 Jahre her. Ja, heute leider Belichtung nicht so mega nice, weil es draußen noch hell ist und ne, die Lampe bringt halt auch nicht so viel. Aber naja, ist ja egal. Ich würde sagen, wir starten mal mit Smash und es geht. Ich wollte das heute alleine gucken und dachte mir, ey, warte mal. Wir haben ja heute Weaction Wednesday. Und es geht um Smash 4 anscheinend. Und warum ist das schlechteste Smash-Game? Also ich habe irgendwie die ersten 20, 30 Sekunden geguckt und ja, dann habe ich mir gedacht, gucke ich das einfach mal im Stream. Ja, also generell mit Beleuchtung werde ich noch gucken. Ob ich da irgendwas bekomme, weil jetzt ist ja Internet dann. Da habe ich ja jetzt keine Lags mehr. Hoffentlich. Selten. Audio will ich noch ein bisschen gucken, dass ich da fixe, aber ne, habe ich ja jetzt letztens ein Mikro gekauft und Ja, als nächstes wäre Beleuchtung generell. Beleuchtung, Background, Setting, alles mäßig so. In der Art. Darum ja. Denke, dass ich da auch was demnächst mache, sobald ich das Geld habe.
Brothers for Nintendo 3DS and Wii U, also known as Smash 4. Yeah, you
Generell, wenn irgendwie Audio oder was ne, blöd ist, ist jetzt nicht nur Video oder Lautstärke generell, sondern ob bei mir irgendwas falsch ist, immer mir sagen. Weil das merke ich halt nicht. Ich merke, wenn irgendwie Internet blöd ist oder Kamera flackert, aber Audio selbst merke ich nicht. Ich habe zwar den Audio-Mix, aber ich merke halt nicht, ne, wie ich mich anhöre. Ich könnte es einstellen, aber ne, wenn ich mich selbst höre, dann kann ich nicht richtig nachdenken.
You heard me, Oliver, is a part of the Smash Brothers series that, once more, I have a complicated relationship with. It's a
Same.
game, or pair of games, that I've previously called Hollow, Soulless, and a mess. All of that in spite of how much I adored it when it was released, and just how important it was to me at the time. And you know what? Enough beating around the bush. Let's talk about why I'm now tempted to call Super Smash
Ich würde es tatsächlich nicht das schlechteste Smash nennen, aber ich verstehe, worauf er hinaus will. Für mich würde das schlechteste Smash immer das erste sein. Einfach aufgrund vom Content her, aber ich verstehe, was er meint. Auf jeden Fall.
Brothers 4, the worst entry
Wahrscheinlich klammert dabei auch das erste ein bisschen aus.
in the series. Nice sentiment. But first, whether Super Smash Bros. For 3DS and Super Smash Bros. For Wii U are the same game or completely different games has always been hazy. They have the same exact roster and generally the same exact gameplay, but each has a different list of stages and modes. Fans call both of them Smash 4, but the director Masahiro Sakurai considers them to be the 4th and 5th Smash games. For simplicity's sake, I'm going to consider these two things different versions of the same game and collectively refer to them as Smash 4.
Ja, also,
Oliver, despite how negative this video
machen es,
will
glaube ich,
soon
alle.
get, I'm gonna start with the part of Smash
Außer
4
Sakurai.
I still hold near and dear to my heart. The characters. We may have lost some old favorites in
Die
the
Charaktere
transition
fand ich
from
aber echt
Brawl.
gut.
Snake, Lucas, and Wolf were left behind, as were the Ice Climbers due to the 3DS's hardware limitations, and Pokemon Trainer was ditched along with Squirtle and Ivysaur to leave Charizard all by his lonesome. But putting all of that aside, Smash 4's suite of newcomers is so good. Quite possibly the overall strongest lineup of new additions to any single game in the series, at the very least competing with Ultimate.
Ja.
I know this is where the pushback against the likes of anime sword fighters and
Wahrscheinlich, also das Roster von Ultimate finde ich immer noch am besten, auch die neuen, aber generell, ich würde sagen, Smash 4 ist so das zweitbeste. Ich glaube, die haben sich generell immer verbessert mit der Zeit. Klar, ein paar waren noch sehr unbalanced. Looking at Bayonetta, aber generell, also, ne, nur mal zu sagen, Smash habe ich echt schon ewig nicht mehr gespielt. Ich glaube, seit Ultimate rauskam, gar nicht mehr, weil ist halt einer der Gründe, ne? Warum es wahrscheinlich Soulless ist. Man hat irgendwie keinen Grund zurückzukehren nach Ultimate. Bei Melee hat man Gründe, bei Brawl hat man Gründe. Vielleicht sogar Smash 1 wegen den Modes, I don't know. Aber Smash 4 ist so. I don't know. Es ist halt basically Smash Ultimate in schlechter.
Fire Emblem characters started up, but quite frankly, I think that whole outrage is pretty stupid, and maybe that's a discussion for another day. Regardless, so many Dream Fighters joined the battle here. Mega Man, Little Mac, Pac-Man, and later Ryu, Cloud, and Bayonetta, just to name a few. Hell,
Meine Mains waren Villager und Mega Man, glaube ich.
personally speaking, Bowser Jr. and Duck Hunt were characters that had been on my wish list for a long time. Yep, I was one of those kids. And nearly all of the newcomers, from the highly requested icons to the niche oddballs, are so intricately designed for Smash. Across the board, there's so many unique playstyles, character-specific mechanics, and interesting quirks that generally allow these fighters to
Link war auch
faithfully
cool.
represent their canonical counterparts, while also introducing fresh content.
Also ich glaube, in Smash 4 habe ich Link nicht so viel gespielt, aber dafür habe ich in Wobei ich glaube, ich habe Young Link manchmal gespielt. In Smash Brawl war aber einer meiner Mains Toon Link. Das weiß ich noch. Und später dann ein Ultimator. Schwertkämpfer mag ich eigentlich auch, aber dann gab es halt schon so Sephiroth oder so. Sephiroth war mein Main in Ultimate, als er dann rauskam.
Concepts to Smash Brothers. It's pretty
War mein
telling
Guy.
that this entry's
Oder ist immer
release
noch
was
eigentlich.
when fans really started pointing out how outdated some of the older fighters felt, or in other words, how much the design of the average Smash Brothers character had evolved in just about every way. And I think what really made this side of Smash 4 so special to me was the build-up to release. Now, up to this point, I had grown up with every Smash Brothers game in one form or another. Aside from cheap edutainment games, the original Super Smash Brothers for the Nintendo 64 was the first video game I ever played. Shortly after, I got a GameCube and played Melee to death, and then later I played Brawl a ton too. But having been born in 2000, the year of the beast, I wasn't really privy to the hype cycle for any of these games. I mean, Melee was revealed at E3 2001.
Wow, they added the Ice Climbers?
And while Brawl had the fondly remembered Smash Bros. Dojo for announcements leading up to release, I only became smart to that scene around the time of Sonic's reveal. But with Smash 4? Oh, I was on that hype train from E3 2013 all the way
das war
up
eine
to the
coole Zeit.
2014 release. So that
Das war eine
whole
coole Zeit, ich erinnere
experience,
mich auch noch.
being excited and surprised by each new trailer and showcase, speculating who and what would come to the game next, and just
Generell irgendwie Whip Attica, by the way. Generell, ich erinnere mich noch, ich habe Smash 4, die Wii U-Version, habe ich mir, pretty sure, am gleichen Tag wie Pokémon Alpha Saphir geholt. Und ich wollte zocken, aber ich musste an den gleichen Tag in den fucking Zirkus. Und es war so ein Weihnachtszirkus mit meiner Mutter, einer Arbeitskollegin von ihr und deren Tochter, die war auch so in meinem Alter, ich glaube 1, 2 Jahre jünger als ich. Also, ich war 12, glaube ich, sie war 11, maybe 12, keine Ahnung. 11 oder 10. Ich wollte einfach nur nach Hause und zocken.
becoming more aware of and involved with the community, it was priceless.
I've said it before and I'll say it again. If not for all of that, I probably wouldn't be so invested in the internet culture surrounding video games, much less running this YouTube channel. So for that, thank you Super Smash Bros. For 3DS and Wii U. Now on to why I
Hätte ich
actually
auch machen
fucking
können,
hate
true.
this thing.
Contrary to popular belief, there's more to Smash Bros. Than its roster. You may forget that sometimes, what with how all the speculation and discussion revolves around which characters have joined and will join the battle. But
Holy
fighters
shit, it's
are,
Scott and Ross.
by default, the most important part of the game. But they're not the only important part of the game. In my opinion, the real unsung hero of Smash, and in fact all of Sakurai's games, is the wide array of things to do. These games always give you a ton of content outside of the abundance of playable characters. Fun and unique places to go, prizes to work towards, modes that almost feel like their own games within the game. On top of all that, each Smash game has their own take on all of those, meaning there's a reason to remember and revisit each and every entry.
Ich habe noch nie Melee gespielt. Noch nie. Will ich irgendwann nachholen, auf jeden Fall, aber habe ich noch nie gespielt.
No matter how much time passes.
See, that's how Smash 4 actually mixes up the series formula. It doesn't have any of that. I'd like to break down Smash 4's biggest weaknesses into a few major categories. We have a lot of ground to cover. Lucky me. So, let's start with the least offensive of the bunch, the stages.
Meine Favorite Stage war diese WarioWare
I
Stage.
am still offended.
Wo die
though.
Mutter immer
This is
reinkam
kinda
und
lame. I mentioned this before, but
geguckt
the
hat.
3DS and Wii U
Ja.
versions of the game have
Nee,
different stage
muss sie.
lists. They share a few stages,
Die fand ich aber immer cool.
but overall you're getting a different selection for each. And man, I'm just not really into a lot of the brand new stages.
war auch cool.
Don't get me wrong, most of them look really good. I mean, the whole game does. There was nowhere to go but up after. But so many stages are just too gimmicky for their own good, have bizarre layouts that don't feel great to fight on, or, of course, they're plagued by overly intrusive stage hazards. Sure, the
I mean,
previous
to be
game
honest, das war
stages
nicht gar
had
nicht
their
so
fair
schlecht.
share of wacky obstacles, but with Smash 4, they doubled down on Brawl's worst tendencies, and it's consistently way too much. Elements like wrecking crews
Weil man hatte doch eh. Wurde das in dem Spiel eingeführt oder erst im Nachfolger mit den Omega Stages? Ich glaube, das wurde hier schon eingefügt. Also, basically hat man immer eine Final Destination Variante.
destructible layers, Wily Castle's Yellow Devil, and Pac-Land's everything absolutely
Aber ja,
ruin
bei
those stages
manchen
because
war
they
es ein
cause you
bisschen
to
too
struggle
much.
more against the environment than the other fighters. I guess that can be enjoyable in its own way, but not like this. These don't add fun chaos to the wackier side of Smash. They just give casual players who normally like that sort of thing a headache, and the more competitive players less options. This garbage is why Ultimate has an extra toggle in its rule sets. Good for it.
Oh,
And do
okay.
you know what's just as bad as annoying stage hazards? Mega stages.
Yo,
Oh my
Fridios.
god, the mega stages. This is another bad trend carried on from Brawl. That game tried to recapture the magic of Melee's temple. Try's a strong word, isn't it? Stages that put sheer scale before level design and thus have often been considered to be some of the worst stages in the series. And we get even more of that here, yay! It does make more sense this time because Smash 4 introduced
Mütze ziehen.
8-player Smash.
Junge, ich wünschte. Ich wünschte, ich könnte, ne? Aber der ganze fucking Umzug war so teuer. Vorhin war eh noch nicht alles durch ist. Geh mehr arbeiten. Ja, Junge, würde ich ja, aber so spontan einen Monat davor. Hättet ihr gesagt, okay, keine Ahnung, August oder so, okay, dann wäre ich wahrscheinlich mitgekommen, aber jetzt so. Viel Logic.
So there is a legitimate
Wär's nicht so
reason for them to
spontan,
have
dann wär
been
ich
chasing
mitgekommen.
this sort of design. That doesn't mean they did a good job. Okay, big
Ja, nächstes Mal bin ich safe dabei. Weil dann ist ja auch alles durch und so.
Battlefield, it's exactly what it says on the tin. It's Battlefield, but with a bigger base and more platforms to accommodate. It gets the job done, and that's the most you can say about it. Palutena's Temple and Gara Plain have New Pork City syndrome. By that, I mean their solution to their own scale was to toss platforms and walls around with little rhyme or reason. Like baby's first Mario Maker level.
Nehmt mal aber Florian mit. Das wäre lustig.
They're not the absolute bottom of the barrel, but I never find myself actually wanting to play on them over any other stage, even for 8-player battles. You know what is the bottom of the barrel? The Great Cave Offensive. Hey, you want a stage with random claustrophobic platform layouts? So big that during a typical battle you can't see shit, and horrifically enclosed to the point that they had to add these random lava pools that insta-kill you at 100%, defeating the actual purpose of percentages and knockback in a platform fighter? Then this stage is for you.
Not genau, einfach weil es eine Stage war, fand ich das eigentlich ganz cool.
I
Wäre das bei jeder so, dann wäre scheiße, aber bei der einen fand ich das eigentlich ganz cool.
don't think it's for me. Even for the stages I don't hate, several of them are a bit too derivative of previous stages. Town and City, it is very similar to Smashville. They do have different layouts, but
True.
the basic idea and aesthetic is nearly identical. Mario Circuit? Again? Windy Hill Zone? Well, I'm not gonna say rehashing Green Hill isn't faithful. Flat Zone X isn't a new. And then there's the returning stages. You know, seeing all of these haphazardly clog up the stage selection
Und das
instead
ist
of
immer
being on
cool.
their own page or organized chronologically is another reason why Smash 4's stage list is just so to me. Oh, and also, these stages are really showing their age. When they upgraded the visual of these familiar levels in Ultimate, it was a very welcome change because, oh man, do they really look like old stages here. And they can often clash with the higher fidelity and more vibrant character models of this game. Even the ones from Brawl, just one game, one console generation back. They look dated. Not to mention, some of the ones they picked to come back. Oh boy, 75 meters. And all of these problems are exacerbated by the fact that the stages are divided between the two versions of the game. If they shared their entire stage list, or if at the very least all of the 3DS stages were also in the Wii U version, that obviously wouldn't make all of these issues magically vanish, but it would give players more options when it comes to the actually good stages and sheer variety. But because the stages are divvied up between the two platforms, neither really feels complete. And unfortunately, that's a good segue into Smash 4's collectibles. Across the Smash series, these various trinkets provide an incentive to play and master different modes, show more love towards a multitude of games, including those not otherwise represented, and even sometimes change up the gameplay in a multitude of ways. So, how does Smash 4 fare in this regard? First off, there are the tried and true trophies. This is one of the signature elements of Smash Bros. Sure, they're not in the most recent entry, but they make for such recognizable iconography and turn Smash into a sort of video game museum. They peaked in Melee. I'm not sure how popular that opinion is, but yeah, they were introduced in Melee, and in my opinion, they got a little less cool in each subsequent game. I don't know, I think it's just that in their original incarnation, they tended to use more fully custom models, and when they did port stuff, they still did cool things with it, like using models that were only ever used in promotional art, polishing up low-poly N64 assets, or teasing future games. On top of all of that, the sheen on these trophies make them actually look like figurines, as opposed to just game models plopped on a plate. With Brawl, on top of that
fair.
game's own art style being there are a lot more trophies that just directly ported character models from the most recent games, and for the most part, they didn't do anything particularly interesting with them, not even bothering to make them look the part. And then with Smash 4, things are even lamer. Problem number 1, just like the stages, trophies are split between the two platforms. The 3DS version focuses more on Nintendo's handheld history, while the Wii U version, of course, hones in on their home console lineage. That sounds like a neat idea, but in practice, similar to the stage list, it makes each game's catalog of trophies appear unfinished. And it's a short-sighted idea anyway, because not all of these series have a massive presence on both consoles and handhelds.
Weil to be honest, auch für Trophies und so habe ich nie wirklich geachtet. Ich fand es immer cool, aber ich habe nie drauf geachtet, so im Detail.
Wii Fit doesn't have 3DS exclusive trophies. Who could have expected that? Point is, this approach makes the trophy gallery less effective as a museum, because I'm only getting half the story at best. But the much bigger problem is, as I said, the trophies that are in either game are underwhelming in their own right. Not only do we have even more plain old boring model ports that don't look like figurines, but now we're dealing with an infestation. 2D trophies. Yep, these ones just suck. I thought a big part of the appeal with trophies was that you could rotate, zoom in on these models. If they're just sprites, why even bother? And you know what I really hate about them? If these trophies were in Melee, they'd be given brand new models. That game took retro throwbacks that had only ever been 2D sprites and reimagined them in 3D. And that was cool because it gave an idea of what those characters would look like in Smash or a modern reboot or something. There were some 2D trophies, but those select few felt like special stylistic decisions. These just feel lazy. We already have these 2D sprites in the game. Slap them on a circle. They're jarring compared to the 3D trophies, and they're not even consistent with each other. You can spin some of them around, but others always track the camera, and then a few of them actually have depth. Now, the latter still isn't as cool as Melee's approach, but it's something. Why not update the other flat trophies to match, since that would at least look better than... So yeah, Smash 4 is the reason I wasn't heartbroken about trophies being gone in the next game. That's a good start. What about the other collectibles? Ah! Nope, not doing that.
Ich muss, glaube ich, echt mal irgendwie die ganzen Trophies nochmal angucken. Oder auch in Ultimate die fucking... Oh, was waren's da? Spirits hießen die so? Eigentlich wollte ich mal alle sammeln, aber irgendwann, keine Ahnung. Irgendwann hatte ich keinen Bock mehr. Vielleicht mache ich das nochmal. Ja, lustig.
Yeah, this menu sucks, right? Yeah, I know. Declaring that Smash 4 has bad menus is like saying water is wet at this point. But it's true. Not only does it reuse nearly all of its sound effects and general design cues from Brawl, making for a less distinct and more forgettable aesthetic, but the buttons are all these giant, ugly, randomly colored stickers that are all different shapes for no reason. And they're arranged sort of diagonally, so it can be unclear which direction to flick the control stick in to get to the option you want. Worst of all, the organization is absolutely abysmal. Guys, I played this game so much during its lifespan, and I still get lost on my way to the f***ing training mode. And come on, games and more? What is the more here? Okay, let's talk about that now. A feature that was supposed to be a huge selling point for Smash 4 is the ability to customize fighters. Yes, there were outright custom characters in the form of the Mii fighters.
Somehow Palpatine returned.
But players were given similar options with the rest of the roster, through the addition of equipment and custom moves. To start with the simpler and frankly less interesting one, pieces of equipment can be given to fighters to buff either their attack, defense, or speed at the expense of nerfing a different stat, often with a secondary effect in tow. Yeah, as you can tell, you can get some pretty wacky results from this. Equipment is pretty clearly not meant for anything resembling serious play, just single-player modes and zanier multiplayer experiences, kind of like Spirits in Ultimate, though way less fun because instead of some beloved character or iconography, it's an orange sword. And that's worth mentioning because any given piece of equipment is so expendable.
Ich glaube, ich habe das mal ganz wenig gemacht. Also ich habe das irgendwie, I don't know, als ich den Classic Mode oder so gespielt habe, vor Jahren, habe ich das manchmal ausprobiert und I don't know. Es war, ja, keine Ahnung. War halt nichts Besonderes, hat der Nachfolger schon besser gemacht.
You get rewarded so much of it constantly, seemingly at random, and all pieces use the same handful of icons and even names. It's to the point that the act of collecting these things just becomes meaningless. The far more compelling customization option comes in the form of custom moves. That's right, for the first and only time in a Smash Bros. Game, you can swap out a character's special moves to create your very own version of their moveset. Or at least, that's what it would be like in a perfect world. We don't live in a perfect world. Some custom moves are really cool. Palutena is sort of like the Mii's in that she was designed around the feature, so she gets a lot of cool, distinct options for her moveset. A couple other characters get really in-depth changes, several of which represent even more of their source material. And a few of the simpler ones that might just change an attack's trajectory or something can still lend themselves to new and compelling playstyles. But way too many of these things are just uninspired and samey. Oh look, the projectile is bigger and stronger but moves slower. Oh look, the up special goes higher but doesn't have a hitbox. Hey, do you want a win box? Even a lot of the unique ones are lame. Why would you ever use that? Look, I don't care if custom moves are unbalanced, honestly. As much as I like competitive Smash Brothers, I am perfectly fine with features not being made for it. The more chaotic side of Smash is just as important to me. The problem isn't that they're not balanced, the problem is that most of them aren't interesting. They effectively tripled the number of special moves. The move slot typically reserved for a fighter's most mechanically interesting and canonically faithful tools, lest we forget. And for the most part, instead of cramming in even more references or giving fighters cool new toys to work with, Mario has big fireballs now! Oh, and they were barely allowed online, and like equipment, most custom move drops are random, and you can get duplicates. So have fun collecting them all, you know, for the right to use Big Fireball. Sometimes. Whether we're talking about trophies, equipment, or custom moves, the operative word is underwhelming. In Smash Brothers, these sorts of rewards are supposed to be a big incentive to play through various modes and complete the game's challenges, and this is the best you've got? But hey, in fairness, the rewards don't have to be anything mind-blowing. After all, if the game's modes are fun and interesting enough on their own, then yeah, I'll play them just for the sake of playing them. You don't have to pay me. Sadly, that brings us to what is, in my opinion, Smash 4's greatest shortcoming. Its modes. See, if I had to explain my biggest issue with this game in a sentence, I'd say there's a stark lack of things to do.
Ich weiß nicht mehr genau,
you
was
might be
alles
thinking,
war, aber
"That's
ich weiß, die
ridiculous.
3DS
There's
Version war
plenty
da
to do
besser.
in this game. Just look at the menus. There's so many options, various game modes to explore, even if you're alone." First of all, how dare you make me look at this godforsaken menu again? More importantly, yes, there seem to be a lot of options. There's a plethora of buttons to press, but are they really distinct or compelling? I've come to call this aspect of Smash 4 the illusion of content. The 3DS and Wii U versions of the game have a handful of exclusive
cool.
modes, though I'll start with the shared modes. To begin with the simplest of those, the Stadium section. Only one of the three options here is entirely new: Target Blast. This mode is meant to be a replacement for Target Smash / Target Test / Break the Target / Smack the Red Circle stupid. That is kind of a bummer, since in 64 and Melee, that minigame was an excellent test for each character's attacks and movement options. But keep in mind that in Brawl, no doubt due to the growing size of the roster, character-specific Target Smash stages were replaced by 3 generic and uninteresting levels. So at that point, we're not missing out on that much. This is still a weird way to fill that void though. Target Blast,
Ich
where
auch
you're
nicht.
aiming to knock
Ich
a
habe mir
bomb
nicht so wirklich
towards the
Gedanken
right
gemacht, weil
spot
ich
in
die
order
nie
to
gespielt
shatter
habe,
as
aber
many
es ist
targets
schon
as possible. Aside from this being a
schon etwas
super
stupid.
shallow experience with not nearly as much replay value, challenge, or even fun as other minigames in the series, the only thing Target Blast has in common with Target Smash is, well, the targets. If anything, this more closely resembles Home Run Contest.
Ja.
Oh, Home Run Contest is the same as always, woo. And for the most part, I can say the same about Multi-Man Smash, which as always, is the lamest of these stadium modes. The new enemies here are the Fighting Me team and... sigh. I will say that having Mii's as the Horde in this mode makes sense for the whole Nintendo crossover thing, but... man, the original creatures of the previous games were way cooler. That being said, yeah, pretty much the same as always. Moving out of the stadium, All-Star mode seems like much of the same. A gauntlet where you must fight through the entire roster with limited heals between battles. And now the characters appear in chronological order, which is a nice touch. But, oh, they made it too easy. So apparently in this game, the player deals way more and takes way less damage, meaning they are significantly stronger than the CPUs. You know, I hate to be that guy who's like, games were way harder back in the day, and now everything's dumbed down. But in the case of All-Star mode, this kind of kills the experience. The damage modifier was definitely implemented because you're fighting more opponents at once. Even so, it doesn't feel right. The whole point of All-Star mode is that it's the ultimate endurance test. Here, I can just spam up smash for most of the battle and get away with it. It doesn't feel like I'm scratching and clawing my way through gaming's greatest icons. It feels like I'm shoving around a bunch of kids on the playground.
Ich wusste nicht mal, dass da ein Multiplikator ist. Ich dachte einfach, okay, die wären einfach Computerlevel 5 höchstens.
That was not Luigi.
Well, in terms of common modes between the 3DS and Wii U, that just leaves good old Classic mode. Classic mode has never been the most awe-inspiring thing, but it's a reliable fixture of the Smash games. It's your traditional fighting game arcade mode. Battle through a semi-randomized series of fighters on their home stages, play a minigame or two, and face off against a final boss. And hey, the 3DS version keeps it pretty familiar with a few interesting twists. Namely, there are branching paths so you can pick your battles to get different rewards. A new phase of the final battle too, the Master Core. Not the best boss fight in the Smash Bros. Series by any means, but a nice change of pace nonetheless. Well, with the Wii U's extra horsepower, I wonder how it built upon this solid take on Classic. I should stop pretending to be happy. Smash for Wii U turned Classic mode into a mess.
Das war so
Impressive.
kacke.
So you're on this board and you have all these options for which battle to go
so
into,
scheiße.
but each of those battles are entirely randomized. You're not taking on fighters on their home stage. You're battling whoever the game decided to puke out on whatever stage it decided to puke out. Plus, since a lot of these are 5 to 8 player battles, there's a good chance many of those CPUs will just get knocked out without you even touching them. There's also this rival mechanic where one character is your rival, and if you leave them be, they get stronger, and it's pretty much just another CPU that is exactly like all the others. Yeah, this is the worst version of classic mode. It feels like they really wanted to emphasize the new 8-player battles, but they did so by having these overly randomized fights with zero theming or cohesion. They just become forgettable noise and make the whole mode feel less special. Like, I can get this exact experience by... For a similar story, look at Special Orders, a single-player mode exclusive to Smash for Wii U. It's actually two different modes. Master Orders is pretty straightforward. Pick a challenge from the list, win to earn a reward. Crazy Orders has a bit more of a risk-reward gambling twist to it, where you can keep taking on challenges for more and more rewards before cashing out with a final battle. I get the impression this was meant to be a long-lasting solo draw. It's essentially a rotating towers mode after all. But like I said, it's got the same problem as classic mode where the matches feel too randomized and homogenized.
Das habe ich
There's
nie so krass
essentially
gespielt,
no
weil
theming
ich...
to any of the
I don't
battles,
know.
and when
Ich
they
glaube, das hat
do
mich
have
irgendwie
unique
verwirrt.
conditions, they're just the basic settings you can apply in Special Smash, and it's still pure RNG. Once more, it comes back to the issue that these modes don't really offer anything that the standard multiplayer doesn't. On the flip side, event matches... Yeah, this is more like it. I mean, the whole point of this mode has always been to put the player in unique, heavily themed scenarios, and since that still holds true here, it has what the other modes are largely missing. Words can't describe how much I miss the trophy tussle events from Melee, but this is still by far the best single-player content in Smash 4. Which is kind of an issue because it only has so much content. It really isn't anything we haven't seen before in the series, and its previous iterations were accompanied by other options that were unique to those entries. Do you understand what I mean by the illusion of content now? Most of these modes blend together because they insist on large, randomized, and uninteresting battles. It all feels like the same thing, and that one thing is
not even special!
Smash's dedicated single-player modes, or just alternate modes in general, should always have some sort of unique hook. A deliberate design and a completely different way it utilizes Smash's core gameplay, providing an experience you can't get elsewhere in the game and thus is worth revisiting. Smash 4 doesn't do that for the most part. I once said this game has a lot of options, but nothing to do. And everything I've said so far is most of the reason for that. The problems with these modes lead them to not only be indistinguishable from each other, but indistinguishable from standard multiplayer battles. I might as well just be playing against CPUs in versus mode. So
Be
what's
honest,
the
das habe ich
point?
auch am meisten gemacht,
All
ja.
of that is especially an issue because, other than those offerings, Smash 4 does not have a core single-player experience. I've talked about this multiple times already, but there is no adventure mode in this entry because Sakurai was upset about the Subspace Emissaries cutscenes being uploaded to the internet. That's really dumb and petty no matter how you slice it, but it's especially silly when you
Das ist der
consider
Grund.
that adventure mode doesn't have to be a story mode. If the cutscenes are the main issue, if you think that it's not worth making a billion of them because they're just going to be uploaded and watched online, then create a version of the mode that doesn't focus on that, which had been done before and would be done again later. I know there's a pretty vocal portion of the Smash fanbase that does just want a Subspace 2, but for me and many other players, the important thing is just having stuff to do outside of bog standard battling. A unique and compelling single player offering that gives us something to work towards, is substantial or replayable or both, and maybe even lets us explore the worlds of Smash in a way that isn't possible anywhere else. That's the sort of thing that can give an entry in the series a distinct identity and provide players with a real reason to revisit that game in particular. I can point out how the other Smash games succeed in that regard, but not Smash 4.
Ja.
But of course, none of the modes I've brought up so far were really supposed to replace Adventure Mode. Target Blast wasn't meant to define the game. Shocking, I know. That's where we get the Wii U's Smash Tour and the 3DS's Smash Run. Direct replacement.
Also ich denke auch bisher, keine Ahnung, ne? Hätte man allein so ein Adventure Mode oder was auch immer eingefügt, es wäre schon ein Grund gewesen, das Spiel mal wieder anzurühren. I don't know. Ich spiele auch nicht Brawl für den Smash-Mode. Fuck no. Brawl ist furchtbar, was das angeht. Ich spiele Brawl für den fucking Singleplayer. Adventure-Mode. So. Für keinen anderen Grund. Vielleicht die Trophies oder so. Keine Ahnung. Maybe das auch. Aber hell no. Nicht für den normalen Smash-Mode. Der ist furchtbar in Brawl. Gefühlt. Im Vergleich zu den anderen jedenfalls. Hätte Smash 4 auch sowas gehabt, dann hätte man auch schon einen Grund gehabt, da wieder zurückzukehren. Aber, ne? Seitdem Ultimate draußen ist, wie gesagt, habe ich das nicht einmal angerührt. To be honest, die anderen Teile auch nicht. Es liegt aber daran, dass ich nur Brawl besitze daneben. Aber ich habe letztens überlegt, oder beziehungsweise ich habe es sogar fast mal angerührt, letztens. Aber bei Smash 4 habe ich nie darüber nachgedacht, weil wozu?
For adventure mode, but only because they're featured prominently on the main menu and are also green. Yeah, I never understood why they were sold this way. They're not even single player, they're both
Das war
multiplayer
das.
party modes.
Ja, ich muss sagen, die Wii U-Version war kacke, was das angeht. Die 3DS-Version mochte ich, diesen Smash One. Der war cool.
Though you've heard this all before if you've seen my video all about Smash Tour. That's also the reason why I won't get into the weeds of that mode here. But just to sum up my thoughts, this is the worst Smash Bros. Mode ever. It's a visually ugly and mechanically messy board game that clearly takes cues from Mario Party while changing a bunch of things that work there in a desperate attempt to be different, which just ends up making for a less enjoyable game. It's bad on its own, and it's made worse by the fact that it's supposed to be compensation for taking away adventure mode. If you want to hear about these opinions of mine in more detail, check out my video aptly titled The Worst Smash Bros. Mode Ever. Well, I've talked about Smash Tour in depth before, but not the 3DS's equivalent.
Das fand ich
What
cool.
about Smash Run? This is so much better than Smash Tour.
Ja.
Really, Smash Run is a pretty damn cool mode. Its concept is heavily inspired by the City Trial mode in Kirby Air Ride. In the first phase, 4 players are dropped into an expansive labyrinth and are given 5 minutes to explore the area, defeat enemies from various series, and complete some challenges in order to collect as many stat buffs as possible. When the timer runs out, a final battle ensues, and those power-ups are carried over, which can predictably make for some absolutely ridiculous results. Oftentimes, this final battle is, well, some type of battle between all players. But there's also horizontal and vertical races, as well as multi-man contests featuring either the Fighting Me team or the enemies from the labyrinth where you're competing against.
To be honest, das Ende war mal so das Langweiligste halt, ne? Aber dieser Pfad dahin, diese Welt, wo man die Dinger sammelt und so, das fand ich immer sehr cool.
The other players for the highest score. This concept is awesome, and I think it's executed fairly well here, especially compared to the rest of Smash 4. I'm generally in love with any form of exploration in video games, so I do get a kick out of investigating every nook and cranny of the labyrinth, but I think what really steals the show here is the lineup of enemies. Baddies from Mario, Zelda, Pokemon, Kid Icarus, and more. Not only is tearing through them a reliable source of dopamine, but so many of them have unique behaviors that become especially interesting when you're facing larger combinations or encounter a special event. All of the cool stuff that Smash Run offers make for the exact thing I've been harping on about, a distinct experience that you can't get elsewhere in the game or even the rest of the series.
Yeah.
That being said though, I still feel that there's a handful of glaring flaws keeping Smash Run from truly being the defining feature or saving grace of Smash 4. First, it only has this one map during the exploration phase. That mostly works because there's a pretty wide variety of enemy and loot spawns, random events, and the like. So it's not as if you're getting the same thing every time. But still, my aforementioned exploration-fueled lizard brain wants more.
Das ein bisschen ausgebaut wäre echt gut gewesen. Hätten sie da ein bisschen mehr Fokus drauf gemacht, wäre das richtig gut gewesen. Weil jetzt aktuell, so wie es ist und so wie es bleibt, ist es halt so, ja. Aber es ist nicht ganz genug, um zurückzukehren. Es ist unique, aber es ist nicht genug.
more.
Ist
A
es zu
slightly
klein?
bigger issue is that even though everyone is technically exploring the same labyrinth at the same time, each player has their own client-side version of that level and can't see or interact with the other players. That's a real shame because players being able to mess with or maybe even help each other during that first phase would
Ja.
potentially lend itself to more of the player-driven chaos one would expect from a multiplayer mode. A much bigger issue is that you can't play Smash Run online. Yeah, that's a
Yeah.
pretty big problem, because it's a multiplayer mode in a game that heavily emphasizes online play. And because this is the 3DS version of Smash 4, it can be really difficult to get local multiplayer going. It's not just as simple as sitting around the TV and handing out controllers. Each player needs their own 3DS and their own version of the game, and good luck reliably pulling that off at the odd gathering. Online compatibility would greatly alleviate that problem, but because that wasn't available, I didn't.
Tatsächlich, auch wenn es denn die Identität von der Version widerstehen würde, wäre ich echt dafür, dass man das zurückbringt. Einen neuen Teil. Aber weil es hier so ein bisschen flawed war, oder teilweise sehr, zum Beispiel mit dem Online-Mode, habe ich total vergessen. Auch wenn es die Identität klauen würde, bringt das zurück und verbessert das einfach. Macht es online, macht ein paar mehr Stages. Gut ist.
Really get to play Smash Run with other human players that much, and I'm sure I'm not alone on that one. Every single one of those problems seemed to be products of the hardware. The system couldn't handle multiple giant maps, it couldn't handle multiple players loaded into the same labyrinth, and it couldn't handle an online version of the mode. There are other issues with Smash Run, like not being able to customize the time limit, or the prevalence of plain Jane final battles as opposed to the far more interesting options like the races, but the 3DS's limitations clearly make for the mode's greatest setbacks.
So, by far the best thing Smash 4 has going for it. Its most unique, compelling, well-designed feature. The one mode across either version of the game that has a distinct identity, and thus gives a good reason to come back to this entry in particular, is held back by being on this.
Man hätte das tauschen sollen.
Though, let's be honest,
Diesen weirden
even
Mario
if
Party Modus auf dem
Smash Run had been
3DS.
on the Wii U and was able to reach its full potential, it still wouldn't be a replacement for Adventure Mode. It has gameplay elements from the previous
Yeah.
two adventures, but it's still a relatively short multiplayer party mode as opposed to a single-player time sync. When I say that Smash 4 is the worst entry in
Es
the
ist halt ein
series, I'm not saying it's a
kleiner
bad
Minimod,
game
so,
or
aber-
even that it fundamentally gets Smash Brothers wrong. What I am saying is that between its lackluster stages, its derivative and messy aesthetic, its ho-hum collectibles, and most importantly, its criminally underwhelming array of modes, Smash 4 feels surprisingly devoid of content, lacks an identity of its own, and gives little reason to boot it up nowadays compared to any other entry in the series.
It's such a shame to say that too, because again, Super Smash Bros. For 3DS and Wii U was such an important game for me. It may just be the Smash game that had the greatest influence on me, but looking back at it, it's such an empty experience compared to the other entries. And I didn't even go through all the reasons for that.
After getting used to Ultimate's core gameplay, Smash 4 feels so sluggish, like they were aiming for what Ultimate is, but didn't go far enough. Look at how slow that knockback is, my god! Online is better than Brawls, but that's the lowest of bars. For fun is a mess.
Yeah.
4 players plus items and stage hazards leads to lag central, and For Glory only lets you play with 2 stocks, and only on Omega forms, aka Final Destination. Yeah, I know, haha, funny Fox meme, but really, FD is one of the least balanced legal stages. Believe it or not, a platform fighter is typically designed around having, you know, platforms. I know Ultimate's Online has its own laundry list of issues, but at least it isn't this damn limiting. This is the worst opening movie in the series. The CGI clips have clashing art styles. There's hardly any actual cinematography in the gameplay footage, and the whole thing is barely synced with the music. These titles suck, but at least just being called 4 3DS and 4 Wii U fits Smash 4's lack of identity. The game's on the
Yeah.
Wii U. And then there's Bayonetta. Ta! Yes, the character's so broken she ruined the game. If you were there, you know what it was like. It was hell. Not just because of how overpowered Bayonetta herself was, but because of the terrible effect she had on the community. The only reason she didn't end up being far more damaging to the competitive scene than, say, Meta Knight was to Brawl, is that the game was replaced so quickly. I mean, need I remind you of EVO 2018? This is the image of an entire community, players, spectators, and everyone else severely jaded by the poison rotting their game from the inside out.
What a sad display. But luckily, controversy would never befall those two players ever again.
Oh mein Gott. Ja, also das Video war so. Ich agree nicht mit allem. I mean, welche Punkte man hatte hier. Die Charaktere waren gut, da agree ich. Stages fand ich auch gut. Mostly, im Gegensatz zu ihm. Verstehe aber ein paar Punkte, aber I don't know. Finde ich, macht auch irgendwie Smash aus. Trophies, ja, okay, da kann ich mich nicht so aus, aber I guess da agree ich denn. Bei Melee habe ich nie gespielt. Menü, ja. Das war was? Ach, das war das, ja, okay. Da rede ich gar nicht drüber, weil das war dumm. Die Modes waren sehr enttäuschend und Smash Tour, Smash One, ja. Da fand ich die 3DS-Version ganz gut, aber war jetzt auch sehr flawed, so. Bup, bup, bup. Okay, nice. Erstes Video dann. Ich überlege gerade, machen wir jetzt. Bup, bup, bup. Bei dem Video weiß ich tatsächlich gar nicht, was das alles wird. How Pokémon became a logistical nightmare of design. Ich denke mal, da geht es irgendwie um Schwertschild, laut Thumbnail. I don't know. Ich guck's mal einfach.
Pokemon.
Mal gucken.
Yes, for a vast majority of people that only have a passing interest in Pokemon and don't have time to have vehemently heated arguments about video games made for children, it's a franchise from your childhood that's continued along perfectly fine. But if you're even remotely attuned to the Pokemon discourse, the grumblings have only been getting louder these past few years, as many fans have grown to be disappointed with Game Freak's recent output, gradually becoming more disillusioned with what being a fan of this series means. Talk to any Pokemon fan and they'll likely tell you in excruciating detail all the issues they have with modern Pokemon. The games have too much feature creep, the games don't keep enough features, the games have deviated too far from the original appeal, the games don't deviate enough, they lied about the National Pokedex, the graphics aren't up to date, why can't we get a game like Breath of the Wild, Game Freak's just too lazy, blah blah.
Okay, ich sag mal so, was modernes Pokémon angeht. Sagen wir mal, modernes Pokémon ist ab Gen 6. Auch wenn 6 schon wieder ein bisschen älter ist. Ich finde, Gen 6 und 7 sind overhated. Vor allem 7. Warum auch immer. Ich weiß nicht, warum 7 so overhated ist. Gen 8 verdient den Hate. Und Gen 9, ja. Gen 9 ist ein bisschen peinlich, aber hat ja auch gerade erst angefangen. Mal sehen, wie es noch wird.
Blah blah. But while everyone has their own.
Wobei ich auch sagen muss, dass Gen 8 mit der Zeit auch besser wurde. Außer nicht Let's Go. Die Diamant Perl Remakes, die waren echt peinlich.
Own solutions for how to fix
Die waren echt
Pokemon,
peinlich.
most don't entirely look at the bigger picture, both as games
Aber
and
Legends
as a
Arceus
franchise.
war ganz okay.
Because a lot of these issues with Pokemon are more multifaceted than just developers lazy. To be upfront, this isn't going to be your usual screeching about how this is the downfall of Pokemon or Game Freak stole my wife type videos, nor will it be a staunch defense of the Pokemon Company and everything it does. There is definitely a metric ton of bad faith criticism directed at this series, but it's not as if Game Freak and their parent company haven't delivered some self-inflicted wounds to cause that. So you aren't getting a cathartic takedown nor a fierce defense here. This is more an attempt to understand what factors are causing a lot of Pokemon stagnation over the years, despite its continued popularity. Or as best as someone that doesn't know the exact inner workings of the game's development can.
Ich finde das halt echt mal interessant, ne? Ich würde super gerne mal wissen, wie Game Freak arbeitet. So wie das generell alles vonstatten läuft. Ich fände das mal super interessant. Wie die das alles regeln mit der Pokémon Company, mit Creatures, mit Nintendo. Ich frage mich echt, wie das da abläuft. Nicht mal um zu sehen, wie die verkacken, sondern generell, wie das abläuft. Finde ich mal super interessant. Wird wahrscheinlich nie passieren, weil, ne, generell japanische Firmen sind sehr, oder vor allem in dem Bereich, sind immer sehr verschlossen. Ist nicht so wie im Westen, dass da teilweise, keine Ahnung, äh, dass die sehr offen umgehen. Also, wenn man solche Microsoft mit Nintendo vergleicht. Nintendo sagt kaum was und Microsoft sagt ganz offen und ehrlich, ja, wir verkacken.
But hey, that just puts me on the same level as a majority of Pokemon YouTubers on this platform. Also, as someone who's worked in retail and customer service for over a decade, and on the internet just as long, I know some customers are always going to be irrationally angry about a product not being every single thing they think it should be. But I hope I can speak to those who want to have a broader look at this franchise's ongoing issues without screeching like a bunch of pissed off monkeys pointing at a tree. Because it's one thing to know that Pokemon has fallen into an enormous rut over the years, and it's another to take a step back to really break down the logistics that make up this IP, and how many of its smaller individual issues have slowly grown and compacted in on each other to the point it's holding everything back. But before we can really get into that though, we first need to understand the scale of the problem itself. As a simple starter, since 1996, we've had 13 mainline entries over 8 generations, 898 Pokemon, not counting the hundreds of variants like Mega Evolutions or regional forms, 826 moves with their own stats and properties, over 50 spin-off games, thousands of different Pokemon cards, over 74 sets,
Ist
over
halt schon
1100
viel.
episodes of the anime, 24 feature films including Detective Pikachu, and we're only just scratching the surface level here without getting into the vast world of merchandise that comes with all of that.
Ist halt schon brutal.
Since the humble 8-bit beginnings of Red and Blue, the Pokemon franchise has turned into this amorphous, ever-expanding, avaricious monstrosity that absorbs anything remotely within its reach, while constantly pumping out product to be consumed on a constant schedule. Frankly, even attempting to research this was an existential experience because this franchise has existed nearly as long as I have, and there are now so many avenues of the Pokemon brand to go down once you really start digging into it. Like, did you know there are multiple ASMR videos on Pokemon's official channel that are strangely well produced?
Mein Guy.
But to fully appreciate just how
Just like me,
massive
for real,
Pokemon
for
has
real.
become in such a relatively short amount of time, we only need to look at some rough estimates of the highest grossing media franchises from early 2019, where Pokemon was ranked at the top of the list with an earning of a whopping $92 billion.
Jesus Christ.
Plus, since those tallies were created, Pokemon has had multiple successful ventures, including but not limited to the recent boom with the Pokemon trading cards that resulted in Target no longer selling packs for the safety of their employees. So I'd say those gross earnings are probably much closer to 100 billion than to 90 as of right now. Worth noting, however, is these earnings are made by the brand through multiple avenues and sources, so not all profits are going to a singular company, and are likely spread across different rights holders.
Yeah.
Not all these profits are going to Game Freak and Game Freak alone, and in fact, it's more likely they're only seeing a minuscule fraction of those returns. So why do I bring all this up? Well, partially because I did all this research and wanted to show it off, but also to give a broader understanding of what Pokemon's profitability means. Outside of how this series about digital pet fighting being worth that much is kind of insane, what's most interesting about these standings is that everything below Pokemon on this graph started decades before it.
Hold up,
These
hold on.
standings is that everything much is kind of insane. What's most interesting
Okay, warte mal, hier kann man sehen. Das meiste bei Pokémon ist Merchandise. Okay. Ein guter Chunk geht an die Games. Orange ist Trading Cards, okay. Braun sind die Comics, Manga. Hellgrün Box Office. Home Entertainment, keine Ahnung, was die damit meinen. Vielleicht sowas wie Blu-rays oder so. I don't know, ob das dazu zählt. Streaming. Okay, aber im Vergleich jetzt so hier Hello Kitty und Winnie Pooh ist halt eigentlich fast nur Merchandise so. Okay, krass.
Interesting about these standings is that everything below Pokemon on this graph started decades before.
Ja, erstens das und die sind auch mit Ausnahme jetzt von Star Wars, hier, keine Ahnung. Ja, okay, sagen wir Mario zählt auch noch dazu. Sind halt, wie sagt man, eher eine Monokultur. Pokémon ist halt so viel breiter gefächert hier. Klar, ein großer Chunk geht an Merchandise, aber super viel an Trading Cards und die Spieler.
What's interesting about these standings is that everything below
Nur Star Wars geht auch relativ in so eine Richtung.
Pokemon on this graph started
Mario, ja. Mario ist halt schon relativ viel Videospieler.
decades before it, highlighting how exponential its growth has been as a series in such a brief period, largely due to how it came at the perfect merging point of nerd and internet culture hitting the mainstream at the exact right moment.
Ja.
Also, unlike most franchises on that list, or any really, Pokemon's success has heavily relied on the fact that it's steadily ever expanding. It's easy to say that all Pokemon does is recycle the same nostalgia bait for Gen 1, which
Pokémon kam halt zum perfekten Moment raus. Zum perfekten Moment kam es raus. Ist ähnlich wie Animal Crossing auf der Switch. Es kam auch zum perfekten Zeitpunkt raus. Generell Pokémon Go. Generell auch noch mit Gen 7 kam ja auch in diesem Jahr raus. Es war das schon auch sehr viel Glück.
is undeniably effective, but there's definitely a vested interest
Aber
from
wahrscheinlich-
fans in seeing how Pokemon
Im Fall von jetzt Pokémon Go in Gen 7 ist das schon wahrscheinlich auch ein bisschen geplant. Außer
continues to iterate with every new entry, specifically with adding new Pokemon to catch. If you don't believe me, just look back at how riled up the internet gets when the Pokemon Company starts showing off new creature designs during the lead up to the next generation dropping. Since the late 90s, each new generation introduced an entirely new region to explore with a new cast of Pokemon to catch and new mechanics to experiment with, which has gradually made the series into a logistical nightmare that neither the Pokemon Company nor Game Freak have found a way to properly maintain. No, Pokemon isn't bad because Game Freak hasn't suddenly spent the
frage mich,
better
was er
part of a
damit meint.
decade and a sizable fortune to make their own gigantic, open-world Breath of the Wild game
Das
with
sieht cool aus.
real-time battle systems and fully rendered attack animations. It's because that's become so far beyond the scope of what Pokemon has ever been, or could realistically be done with the deadlines the developers are routinely given.
Achso,
The
ja.
more
Sie
clear
haben sich ein
issue
bisschen
is that
selbst
the Pokemon
überschlagen.
series has been able to maintain a consistent holding pattern for the last 2 decades with how it was handled while on handheld consoles using sprite assets, but it's now at a crossroads for what direction it needs to go in the future. Pokemon as a franchise has been struggling to maintain its sense of scope for all this time, and it's now stuck between the Pokemon Company and Game Freak taking this step up to the level of AAA franchise that it's always been on the precipice of, but never firmly stepped into, or scale back on its approach to something that's easier to manage so that it can properly refine itself. Both directions that are simpler said than done when it comes to something like Pokemon and its extremely active fan base. For one thing, this series isn't its own league in terms of size and
Ich
design.
habe noch nie Unite gespielt. Ist Unite überhaupt irgendwie. Ist es wert, mal zu probieren? Also es ist kostenlos, darum. I don't know. Es ist ja, glaube ich, so ein bisschen wie League of Legends, darum. LOL hat mir schon nicht wirklich gefallen, darum. I don't know, ob mir das gefallen würde, aber. Ich habe das Gefühl, es ist ein bisschen Pay to Win, aber I don't know, vielleicht irre ich mich auch.
Pokemon has a formula that's incredibly easy to replicate. Just look at the sheer amount of fan games currently being put out. But the company itself has been handling and developing it for so long that not anybody can stand on the main series level in terms of reach without some serious time and funds. Many series have attempted to capture that unique Pokemon feel over the years, but nothing has firmly stood its ground when it comes to its size, and more importantly, the consistency of releases. Even Temtem, which many have touted as a Pokemon killer since it took the core formula while incorporating MMO gameplay and some general refinements that gives it a
Ich hab mit Temtem gekauft, aber ich habe es noch nicht gespielt. Ich hab voll vergessen, dass ich mir gekauft habe vor Monaten.
fresher feel, is still a ways from being
Ich glaube, vor einem halben Jahr mittlerweile habe ich es mir geholt. Und ich habe es immer noch nicht angeholt. Ich meine, ich könnte es ja auch im Stream machen, ne? Irgendwann, vielleicht nach Nach 3D World vielleicht. Das will ich erstmal beenden. Ja.
Finished after 4 years of development time and multiple early access updates to add in more content. And if we're being honest here, isn't close to the same scale of Pokemon, even when the National Dex is removed from the equation. The only franchise that operates even somewhat like Pokemon in terms of scope is obviously Digimon. With roughly 1,400 digital monsters as of time of writing,
Jesus.
Digimon is the only monster collecting franchise that survived as long as Pokemon has during the great monster taming wars of the late 90s, early 2000s. But aside from the fact that they're structured completely differently with how they're both handled, one thing that Digimon has done to manage itself is that it adds new monsters consistently through various source materials, compared to Pokemon's giant generational releases that start with new games and then spread outward to its other media. This results in there being fewer expectations for new Digimon games to include every past monster while adding in an entire roster of new ones. The most recent titles
Ich wusste
max
ja
out
nie,
at
dass es so viele
430
Digimon gibt.
Digimon even after an updated version that added more content, which is still less than where Pokemon was at Gen 4 in 2011 if we're only concerned about the numbers of it. But no one's making hashtags about Digimon games not having every possible Digimon in its library because, well, there's not as many fans there, but also because it's never set that as an expectation, and they've done a decent job managing their own sense of scope so that it's manageable to whatever project they're handling, unlike some other series. For literally decades, Pokemon has built its brand around the idea that these creatures you catch are your
Das Ding ist, so zu Anfangszeiten von Schwertschild fand ich das auch super kacke mit dem Dexit. Ich finde es immer noch nicht gut. Mittlerweile, ja, it is what it is, aber ich finde es immer noch nicht gut. Aber was ich nicht verstehe, ist, dass die Auswahl von Pokémon in den Spielen manchmal nicht wirklich Sinn ergibt. Warum jetzt diese Pokémon da sind, aber nicht wirklich andere Pokémon, die eher zum Theme der Region oder zum Game passen würde. Zum Beispiel, ich erinnere mich noch zu Anfangszeiten, bevor der DSC in Schwertschild rauskam und da noch nicht wirklich viele Pokémon da waren. Ich weiß nicht mehr genau, wie der Dex von Schwertschild aussieht, weil ich habe das Spiel 3 Jahre nicht gespielt oder so. Oder sogar länger. 3, 4 Jahre. Aber eine Region, die auf Großbritannien basiert, hat keinen Yorkshire Terrier. Also kein Yorklev. So, zum Beispiel. Es gibt bestimmt noch andere Fälle. Da kam dann mit dem DSC erst dazu. Aber hat dann mit Sicherheit locker 10% der Pokémon in der Region im Dex, die nicht wirklich zur Region passen. So, wo ich mich frage, okay, wenn man schon Dexit macht, dann nehmt doch wenigstens die Pokémon, die irgendwie passen.
your buddies, and you can carry them over into multiple journeys, and the ultimate goal being to catch them all. But as the years have crept up, that sort of design ethos has started to weigh it down just as much as it keeps it relevant. While it might seem like criticism of the franchise has gotten significantly more, what's the polite word to use here? Vocal over the years, it's not as if Sword and Shield dropped and suddenly everyone had their own hot takes to share about why this unfathomably successful company is failing. Nearly every complaint you can find against the newest games is less about developers supposedly being lazy and more reflective of long-running design decisions that were never sustainable long-term as the medium evolved.
Ist dann immer noch schade, dass der quasi Nationaldex einfach so jetzt in Home gepackt wurde und danach nie zurückkam, basically. Also ich verstehe so wegen Dexit und so, ja. Aber schon in Gen 7 fand ich das doof, dass der kein Nationaldex gab, sondern nur den Regionaldex. Ist ganz gut für den Schiller-Pin, aber I don't know, dann lockt den Schiller-Pin einfach hinter den Regionaldex und nicht hinter den Nationaldex, so. Ich mochte das immer in Gen 6. Da habe ich immer bis zu einem Punkt eigentlich alle Pokémon versucht zu collecten. Ich glaube, die ersten 2 Gens habe ich komplett da geholt oder sogar 3. Und dann kam halt irgendwann Sonne und Mond raus, dann habe ich halt immer aufgehört. Aber es war cool. Ich wünschte, das hätte man auch noch in Gen 7 machen können.
Which have slowly been festering away to the
Hätte man auch. I mean, da waren ja noch alle Pokémon verfügbar, aber Es gab halt kein Deck so, ne?
Frustration of longtime fans. But paradoxically, were also integral to the franchise's success over the years. Pretty much every nagging problem in some way, shape, or form, from the visual representation to the gameplay, ties back around to the sheer amount of Pokemon that are currently being juggled, which was a problem that the developers were likely aware of all the way back to the first game. Literally from the first generation, when Game Freak was still just a small group of friends with an idea, programming every Pokemon was already a struggle. Between the 6-year development cycle and the team's limited programming experience, the first Pokemon games were a trial to develop for. We might not appreciate it nowadays, considering the original games take up the same size as your average TikTok video.
Ich habe da letztens mal ein Video gesehen. Ich weiß nicht, welches Video es war oder welcher Kanal. Das würde ich das jetzt mal verlinken. Aber ne, da ging es auch um das Development von Rot und Grün. Und holy shit. Da ist echt einiges schief gelaufen.
But when Pokemon Red and Green were first made, it was being developed for a 2 MB cartridge.
Ich glaube, da ist auch irgendwann haben die mal ihre ganzen Daten irgendwie verloren, weil die Computer einfach verkackt haben. Dann haben sie beinahe aufgegeben, manche haben schon gekündigt und so und dann mussten sie sich erst irgendwie Hilfe suchen, wie sie quasi die Daten wiederherstellen und irgendwann hat es zum Glück geklappt. Aber ne, beinahe ist Pokémon deswegen gescheitert.
And it used every possible byte of storage to fit as many Pokemon as it could. And that's after Nintendo increased the size of the cartridge's memory, and about 40 Pokemon were cut from the original lineup. But that large selection was one of the keys to the series' success.
Das auch noch,
The
ne?
idea of an RPG where you went out adventuring to discover, collect, and trade monsters to then battle with went over huge once it started picking up traction. And without realizing it, the developers at Game Freak had fallen into the perfect formula for a multimedia franchise that would sell like gangbusters. For those who weren't around in the late 90s, if you think that Pokemon is tough to avoid now, you should have seen what it was like when it first popped off. We all collectively kinda went insane for a bit. Before there was even a sequel out, there was already the international game releases, multiple spin-offs in production.
Also ich habe da noch nicht gelebt, so darum keine Ahnung, wie es da war, aber ich frage mich echt, ob 2016 so ein bisschen so war. Weil 2016 war, glaube ich, echt so der zweite Hype. Ich weiß nicht, ob seitdem nochmal da rankam. Ich denke nicht, weil 2016 war echt huge so. Aber ich frage mich echt, ob die, keine Ahnung, 90er noch krasser waren, was das angeht, oder auf so einem Niveau. Das frage ich mich echt.
Trading card game, the full anime series, a manga, and the previously mentioned boatloads of merchandising deals. I can personally state that the reason I got good at math in grade school was because I completed multiple Pokemon math challenge books solely due to the branding slapped on it. Nintendo had struck such a goldmine publishing Pokemon that they had to make a deal with Game Freak and Creatures Inc. to form the Pokemon Company in order to manage the brand so that it didn't slowly tear itself apart with how many directions it was being pulled in.
Ja.
But the core appeal of Pokemon was to catch them all, according to the ads. So what if they were all caught already? I mean, there were only 151 Pokemon, so it'd be pretty boring to continually recycle the same ones over and over again, when the series is all about exploration and discovery. So the obvious decision when making a sequel was to add more. Now, I'll spend a lot of time in this video criticizing how they've handled their unsustained growth over the years, but that initial decision with Pokemon Gold and Silver was a genius move on Game Freak's part. 20 years later, Generation 2 is largely defined for polishing some of the rougher edges that held the first game back in terms of quality. But speaking as someone who was huge into Pokemon when Silver and Gold were being advertised, the big selling point at the time was the promise of even more Pokemon to discover. Like, who remembers the whispers of Peekaboo on the school grounds before the internet had any news translated the instant it dropped? Everyone was dying to know about any hints of new Pokemon that we hadn't learned about yet. But the second generation wasn't just adding new Pokemon.
Ich muss sagen, natürlich, als ich aufgewachsen bin, da gab es schon das Internet und so. Aber als man ein Kind war und man nicht so in Verbindung war mit dem Internet, da hatten wir auch sowas Ähnliches. Nicht so krass und auch nicht nur bei Pokémon immer. Aber wir hatten halt auch so manchmal so diese Gerüchte und so. Oder generell irgendwie einer hat irgendwie im Internet irgendwie einen Trailer gefunden, einen japanischen Trailer, der noch gar nicht so im Deutschen oder so war. Weil damals war das halt noch nicht alles so global, sondern viel regionaler und so. Und die anderen wussten es halt gar nicht. Man hatte halt nicht WhatsApp und so. Dann kam man halt so auf den Schulhof am nächsten Tag und sagte, yo, ich hab da was richtig Krasses gefunden. Und ich habe selbst mal was gefunden und ich dachte so, okay, ich bin locker die einzige Person, die es kennt, weil das war halt auch so ein japanischer Trailer. Und das war damals dieses Mystery Dungeon, was ich da gefunden habe. Ich glaube Mystery Dungeon Gen 5, aber schon auf dem 3DS. Was glaube ich gar nicht so gut war am Ende, aber ich habe das so gesehen und dachte, oh mein Gott, was ist das? Und das war so krass. Heute hat man sowas gar nicht mehr leider. Also ich weiß nicht, wie heute die jüngere Generation so ist, aber viele davon sind ja generell schon mit frühen Jahren so im Internet connected und haben auch alle WhatsApp und so. Darum denke ich mal nicht, dass es mehr so eine Sache war oder heutzutage ist, aber damals war das richtig krass. Und ich denke mal in den 90ern, 80ern war das noch wilder. Vor den 90er, wo halt Pokémon so groß war. Ich erinnere mich auch noch in meiner Schulzeit. Auch mal abgesehen von Pokémon jetzt, da hatte ich so einen Kumpel und das war gerade so ein bisschen die Minecraft-Hochphase. Vielleicht nicht der Peak, aber da wurde Minecraft halt so populär gerade. Ich weiß nicht, wann es war, 2012, 13, so in den Dreh. Und da hat einer meiner Schulkameraden meinte so, yo, weißt du schon, wie man das fucking Never-Schwert macht? Ich so, das Never-Schwert? Wahrscheinlich war es irgendwie ein Mod oder hat einfach, keine Ahnung, ein Gerücht verbreitet, weil what the fucks, ne? Aber ich war so, bäh, was? Es gibt ein Never-Schwert? Heutzutage gibt's eins, ein Neverwhite-Schwert, aber damals so, ne? Ich war so, oh mein Gott, was? Das war so geil.
Pokemon either, because Game Freak were taking the extra step to include every species from the previous games too, allowing for cross-generational transferring. At the time, each Pokemon was a rough amalgamation of pixels, so this wasn't exceedingly hard to implement, even if it required Satoru Iwata to help with the programming to get it all working right, since the original coding was held together by duct tape and a dying child's dream. But it's worth noting how unique this approach was. Hell, even now. We take it as a given since the series has made it part of their brand, but Pokemon is pretty much the only franchise around that attempts to carry over progress from previous games to such an extensive degree,
I mean,
namely in
fair.
a monster collecting RPG, resulting in a sizable amount of coding and planning being done for something only a small percentage of players would actively be using. Pokemon quite easily could have taken the steps that series like Digimon or Monster Hunter took, where the most
Also ich glaube, heutzutage ist es ein bisschen einfacher wegen Home. Ist ja basically alles über Home heutzutage. Aber trotzdem, schon ziemlich krass.
popular monsters would be cycled through
Holy
along with the
boobs.
new ones, but never set the idea that every monster ever was attainable or in the game's code for you to transfer over older ones.
Aber so genau
Because
kenne
that
ich mich
feels
auch
like
nicht
it could
aus.
cause problems down the line.
Ich
maybe
denke mal nur,
hold
es
the
ist ein bisschen
series back
einfacher.
a bit. To Game Freak's credit, this is another idea that was legitimately clever when they first came up with it. But it wasn't something that could be sustainable forever without careful planning and consideration, and was immediately tested how viable it was long term with the release of Pokemon Ruby and Sapphire. Because of the changeover from the Game Boy Color to the Game Boy Advance, along with some fixes to the game's coding, the third generation of games didn't allow any cross-generational transferring with the previous titles, resulting in the first Gen 3 games only having 202 of the 386 Pokemon attainable, as they couldn't have every single previous Pokemon be catchable within the game without bloating their development time or vastly reworking the design approach they had already established. Some seem to think that Sword and Shield were the first generation to cause a shitstorm for Game Freak failing to allow every Pokemon to be transferred over, but 3 generations
up.
in and
Habe ich gerade nicht wirklich
down the
zugehört.
line, maybe
Buffy Nada
hold the
Jumpscare.
series back a bit. To Game Freak's credit, this is another idea that was legitimately clever when they first came up with it, but it wasn't something that could be sustainable forever without careful planning and consideration, and was immediately tested how viable it was long term with the release of Pokemon Ruby and Sapphire. Because of the changeover from the Game Boy Color to the Game Boy Advance, along with some fixes to the game's coding, the third generation of games didn't allow any cross-generational transferring with the previous titles, resulting in the first Gen 3 games only having 202 of the 386 Pokemon attainable, as they couldn't have every single previous Pokemon be catchable within the game without bloating their development time or
Wait. Rubin Saphir hat nicht alle Pokémon?
vastly reworking the design approach they had already established. Some seem to think that Sword and Shield were the first generation to cause a shitstorm for Game Freak failing to allow every Pokemon to be transferred over, but 3 generations in, and it's already a tedious hassle to even attempt to catch every Pokemon. If you want to maintain that living dex by this point, it would require you to have access to all the Generation 3 games, plus a GameCube link cable with Pokemon Colosseum and XD so that you can get the legendary from those games. By this point, catching them all was already unfeasible for a significant amount of players, which is why it's no surprise that this is when the catchphrase "gotta catch 'em all" was silently retired from the marketing and box art, because Game Freak seemed to understand that this was already becoming a challenge to manage. The problem was that they went so hard on the
heutzutage
branding
ist es
for
wieder
so
ein bisschen
long,
einfacher,
to the point of
aber
ingraining the words
also
into
nicht
our brains
alle.
with catchy rap songs
Gotta catch him those that are available.
that there was no going back. Despite those technical issues though, the third generation sold like crazy, to the shock of many who were certain Pokemon was a flash-in-the-pan fad that was about to die out. In fact, this is when the series went into production overdrive, because from Ruby and Sapphire, we would begin seeing a new mainline game released every year or two, either a new generation, upgraded versions, or remakes of older entries. However, in order to maintain that constant growth at this pace, they needed some reliable framework that they could keep to while consistently pumping out new Pokemon, characters,
Die Leute können aber auch nicht erwarten, dass man an dem Punkt alle Pokémon in einem Game hat. Zu Gen 3 Zeiten meinst du jetzt? I mean, nicht alle in einem fangen. True, aber es ging jetzt, glaube ich, primär darum, die alten aus Gen 1 und 2 rüber zu porten. Glaube ich, wenn ich es richtig verstanden habe.
and any unique content specific for each game, which is where the
Ach so,
Pokemon
Gen 9.
formula became etched in stone at Game Freak's office.
Ja, wir können aber zumindest mal aufhören mit den Ja, finde ich auch. Weil, to be honest, es dragt die Generation immer so runter. Allein, was man mit der Story machen könnte, so viel mehr, wenn man einfach beide Legis oder beide Versionen einfach verschmelzen würde. I mean, es klappt ja, ne? Man hat's gesehen, in den Arceus hat's geklappt, in ja, Platin und so hat's auch geklappt. So, I don't know. I mean, ich verstehe es aus einer Business-Perspektive, weil die Main-Editionen verkaufen sich eben am besten im Vergleich jetzt zu Spezialeditionen oder jetzt so Sachen wie Arceus. Aber trotzdem. Ich finde, es dragt halt schon so ein bisschen das Gameplay runter.
Offices. And while this standardized formula is what's causing the Pokemon series to stagnate over the last few years with how
Dass man alle Legis Mythical. Ich finde generell das ganze Legi- und Mythical-Konzept müssen sie so krass überarbeiten. Oder würde ich machen. Nicht müssen sie, weil es verkauft sich. Aber Mythicals sind für mich einfach halt Legis durch Eventverteilungen. So, das war's. Vielleicht gibt es ein paar Ausnahmen, aber I don't know.
predictable it's
Legis gehen noch gerade klar, aber wie Mythicals, wie mit denen umgegangen wird, feiere ich überhaupt nicht.
become, it's additionally what's kept it standing. I'm sure there's probably a layer of the developers being set in their ways and not wanting to change after all these years.
Ist doch gar nicht belohnt, da kein Ohr zu fangen zu. Ja, also ich finde tatsächlich hat es wahrscheinlich Legend Arceus noch ganz gut gemacht im Vergleich zu anderen Games mit den Mythicals, aber halt auch nicht gut in meiner Meinung. Weil Mythicals sind nicht wirklich mythische Pokémon. Die fühlen sich nicht mythisch an. So.
But another layer to it is that they have strict deadlines that need to be met, leaving them little wiggle room to expand on new ideas
ja.
that might cost time that they don't necessarily have.
Ich feiere
Especially once they're pushed into the
generell
3D-era.
ich feiere generell nicht die Eventverteilungen. I mean, ja, bei manchen schon, aber so Mythicals und Shinies und Legis dort zu bekommen, feiere ich nicht. I don't know. Ich finde, man sollte die wirklich in die Story integrieren, wenn man sie schon packt. Mit Ausnahme jetzt von Shinies, aber ne, das ist eine andere Geschichte. Ich finde eher, keine Ahnung, Eventverteilungen sind ganz gut für Pokémon. I don't know. Zum Beispiel sowas wie ein Ash Pajutsu. Kann man gut machen in einer Eventverteilung zum Beispiel. Oder generell, das machen sie ja auch manchmal so Pokémon-Teams vom Anime oder von irgendwelchen VGC-Gewinnern, irgendwelchen Turnieren, packen sie dann auch manchmal das rein. Sowas finde ich cool, aber so Legis und Mythicals und so, finde ich, pack die in die Story rein. Auch nicht alle in jedem Game natürlich. Das fand ich zum Beispiel sehr komisch in XY, dass man einfach random Mewtwo halt gefangen hat, so. I don't know, ich finde Mewtwo packt es in Kanto rein und es reicht dann so. Oder packt es wenigstens thematisch irgendwie, wo es hinpasst. Aber generell, so random einfach hinpacken, einfach for the fucks of it, feier ich nicht.
And development grew more complicated, which is its own issue entirely that we need to get into. Now, let's be honest, when it comes to the first games, Pokemon looked not great. Granted, they were made for a handheld in the 90s that could barely do color, but going back to them nearing 30 years later, the pixel art's a bit rough, and some of the Pokemon themselves look like Pablo Picasso was doing an abstract art piece of the design.
Ich finde es sehr schwer, in die
However,
ersten
after a
Gens
lot of
zurückzugehen.
incremental trial and error
Vor allem die
refining
ersten
their art
zwei.
design, by the end of the DS generation, Game Freak were masters of getting the most out of their pixel art.
Yeah.
They had been doing it for so long that by using simple tricks that manipulate the model, along with some dynamic posing, they were able to give even the simplest.
Ich bin einer der wenigen, der. Ich verstehe, warum viele die Pixelart mögen und bevorzugen, verstehe ich. Aber ich finde nicht, dass die Probleme der neuen Pokémon-Spiele die 3D-Grafik ist. Die 3D, beziehungsweise die 3D-Models. Ich finde nicht, die Models sind das Problem an sich mit den Animations. Ich finde eher, die Probleme sind die Farben. Die Saturation ist, finde ich, viel zu schlecht. Das sieht man besonders bei Dingern wie Gengar.
Designs life. However, after years of
Farben sind
2D
einfach
handheld
nicht so
games,
knallig.
a vocal portion of the fans had started questioning why mainline Pokemon had
bisschen
still not made the jump to
blass.
3D consoles like every other major franchise. Something people back in those days
Nicht nur Gengar, auch zum Beispiel hier Tornopto, generell die Reihe. Wobei die ja auch mit dem Feuer das hat, aber das ist dann eine andere Sache. Ich weiß nicht, wie das ist bei Scarlet Violet, aber naja. Wobei was ich verstehe, auf jeden Fall, was man an den 3D-Modding kritisiert hat eine lange Zeit, ich weiß nicht, wie sie heute dazu stehen, ist, dass jedes Pokémon mit Flügeln unbedingt fliegen musste oder so gut wie jedes. Aber wegen den Air Battles in XY. Das haben sie ja erst gefixt mit Scarlet Violet, zum Glück. Nach 10 Jahren. Oder 9. Ja, da stimme ich dir zu. Und wir haben gerade einen Graphen gehabt, da warst du noch nicht da, ich weiß nicht, wo der war. Hier, warte, wir sind jetzt bei 1850. Ich gehe mal zurück.
franchises from early 2019, where Pokemon was ranked at the top.
Hier war das. Das Ding, selbst wenn sie bei den Spielen jetzt ein bisschen weniger machen, halt sagen, ja, wir machen nur eine Edition und so ein bisschen weniger Geld, geil. Sie werden zu einer hohen Wahrscheinlichkeit immer noch das erfolgreichste Franchise. Einfach weil die Videospiele sind erfolgreich. Sie machen auch den zweitgrößten Marktanteil aus in ihrer Sache, aber ne, man sieht das Merchandise. Das Merchandise macht alles ausgeführt. Klar, Videospiele sind auch sehr gut vertreten, auch das Trading Card Game. Aber würde man davon jetzt, keine Ahnung, ein Sechstel abziehen, wären immer noch gut dabei.
Top of the list with an earning of a whopping
Es würde nicht doll
$92
wehtun.
billion. Plus,
1850 waren wir. 1850.
we're able to give even the simplest designs life. However, after years of 2D handheld games, a vocal portion of the fans had started questioning
Und ich weiß auch, was du meinst mit dem kommerziellen. Halt auch das mit den 2 Editionen und so. Ich finde, man kann Trading auch irgendwie anders involvieren, als nur zu sagen, yo, du hast halt manche Pokémon nicht in dem Game, aber halt in einer anderen Edition, dann trade halt. Ja, keine Ahnung. Ich finde, man kann Trading auch irgendwie anders einbauen. Zum Beispiel irgendwie sagt, getradete Pokémon haben einen Bonus irgendwie. Kriegen einen Bonus. Allein das würde wahrscheinlich schon viel ausmachen. Nicht für alle, aber für einige. Competitive-Spieler, für maybe bestimmte Hunter. I mean, man hat die Masuda-Methode. Für Shiny Hunter braucht man basically Trading. Für die Masuda-Methode. Das ist so eine Sache, die finde ich gut.
why mainline Pokemon had still not
Weil sowas macht halt auch nicht das Spiel kaputt. Sowas ist halt auch nicht geldgeil, meiner Meinung nach. Wenn man Trading so involviert, so zu sagen, yo, du brauchst ein Pokémon aus einem anderen Game, zum Ditto mit einer anderen Sprache von jemand anderem, äh, musst du die halt ertraden, ne? Von jemand anderen und dann hast du halt eine erhöhte Shiny-Chance. Sowas finde ich cool, weil Ditto an sich bekommst du in jeder Edition basically und du musst dir keine zweite Edition holen, gezwungenermaßen. So, sondern es fördert auch einfach so den Austausch zwischen den Spielern, ohne da irgendwie Geldgeld zu wirken. Was Pokédex angeht, ist dann halt nochmal eine andere Sache da. Das finde ich halt teilweise blöd, weil aktuell spiele ich halt Pokémon Mond nebenbei. Und da hatte ich jetzt schon 2 Fälle, wo ich basically 2 Pokémon nicht bekommen konnte, einfach weil es Version locked ist, basically. Einmal wollte ich einen Elfun haben, aber das ist quasi so, ne? In einer Version hast du Dressella, in einer Elfun habe ich jetzt einen Dressella halt und einmal dieses Sendong, einmal Tortonator. Hätte ich auch gerne irgendwie beide gehabt, aber muss mich halt entscheiden. In der Version halt Sendung. Gibt ja auch einige Pokémon, die sehr unwahrscheinlich auftauchen. Genau. Genau, genau. So super seltene und so kann man ja auch machen, ne? Und so wird ja auch Trading gefördert. Ist ja auch eine Motivation. Genau.
made the
Ich
jump to
finde,
3D.
es gibt so viele coole Möglichkeiten, wie man Trading einfach, also jetzt zum Beispiel Trading gut machen kann oder verstärken kann. Ist ja nicht mal nur Trading, ne? Es ist auch Kämpfen, VGC ist ja auch ganz groß. Und der hat ja auch keinen wirklichen Grund oder Effekt auf die Versionen, außer halt klar, wieder der Dex, aber das ist halt eine Sache, die ich nicht gut finde. Dass ja der Dex quasi oder die Pokémon-Auswahl nach Version immer anders ist.
Consoles like every other major franchise, something people back in those days attributed to laziness too, despite the Gen 5 pixel art now being something many highly praise and wish to return to. But, you know, the grass is always greener. The reason the development stuck with 2D assets for so long, according to Junichi Masada, was that the pixel art has so much personality based on who draws it, allowing them a lot of freedom in the way Pokemon are presented at first glance. Where with the 3D models, everything has to be uniformly consistent, which sucks out a lot of that visual personality to the art until you get into animating it. Something that takes a lot more work to bring to life to that same degree.
Ja.
But with Nintendo pushing their 3D hardware, Game Freak didn't really have an option to stick with the pixel art aesthetic forever, even if they wanted to stay on handhelds. So after 3.5
Ich denke auch nicht, dass sie zurück in die 2D-Zeit zurück sollten, weil, I don't know, würde ich persönlich nicht feiern. Wäre auch marketingtechnisch nicht gut. Auch wenn die Fans es sagen, aber ne, die Fans machen nicht den großen Teil, oder Hardcore-Fans machen nicht den großen Teil der Verkäufer aus, sondern meistens sind es wirklich Casuals. Und ne, Casuals wollen sich halt etwas 3D holen. Die wollen sich lieber ein 3D-Spiel holen, anstatt ein Pixel-Art-Pokémon-Game. Und bin ich auch der Meinung. Also ich würde auch lieber ein neues 3D-Pokémon haben, was gut gemacht ist, als ein 2D-Pokémon-Spiel, was gut gemacht ist, weil, I don't know. Nur weil sie gut waren früher, heißt es nicht, dass sie gut sind heute. Und ich denke auch nicht, die beste Möglichkeit ist immer zurück in die Vergangenheit zu gehen. man kann stattdessen auch einfach neue Sachen nehmen und sie einfach gut machen. Man muss nicht immer alte Dinge machen, weil sie gut damals waren.
years of development and translating
Können so, ja, ganz deiner Meinung. Und ich weiß nicht, warum so viele immer sagen, yo, lass uns einfach wieder Gen 5 zurückhaben, so, keine Ahnung, war ja alles gut. Erstens hat sich Gen 5 von allen Spielen am schlechtesten verkauft. Und zweitens, I don't know, Gen 5 ist jetzt 11 Jahre her. Man kann einfach mal loslassen. Klar, es sind gute Spiele, bin ich auch der Meinung. Für mich sind Gen 5 wahrscheinlich auch die besten Spiele der Reihe, aber nicht, weil sie 2D-Games sind. Nicht, weil sie 2D-Games sind. Gen 5 ist meiner Meinung nach gut wegen der Umsetzung, wie sie das gemacht haben mit der Story und so weiter. Und weil es Sequels hat und es generell als Gesamtprodukt sehr gut wirkt. Aber wenn man jetzt die ersten 4 Generationen betrachtet, ich bin kein Riesenfan von den ersten beiden, was technisch angeht, aber es liegt wahrscheinlich eher daran, weil ich es aus moderner Perspektive betrachte und sie damals nie gespielt habe. Gen 3 finde ich ganz cool, habe sie aber noch nie 100% durchgespielt und Gen 4 habe ich nie gespielt. Aber die Remakes, und weil die Remakes ja basically eine fast 1:1 Kopie sind, muss ich sagen, Gen 4, jedenfalls die originalen Spiele, waren nicht wirklich gut. Klar, die Grafik in den Originalen ist besser und so, aber an sich Gen 4, die originalen Spiele, die haben ein paar Flaws.
720
Who's Xenoblade, wenn es jetzt um die Switch geht, ja.
Pokemon into 3D models by Creatures Inc.
Ich bin auch schockiert, als ich vorgestern oder so erfahren habe, dass Schwert und Schild 3 Jahre in Entwicklung war. Also mir war klar, so, dass sie länger waren als jetzt, keine Ahnung, von Let's Go zu Schwert Schild, aber ich dachte eher 2 Jahre. Als ich erfahren habe, dass es 3 Jahre waren, war das eher so, boah, was habt ihr gemacht?
outsourced the work to, since a vast majority of the artists at Game Freak were pixel artists, we got to Pokemon X and Y. And
Overhated. Es hat seine Flaws, ja, aber overhated.
since then, it's felt like the franchise has been struggling to maintain that consistent visual progress that had been seen going from the first generation all the way to the fifth. It's not as if they haven't tried to keep
Generell, ich feiere es nicht so wirklich. Also, keine Ahnung, wenn man sagt, Gen 6 und 7 haben ihre Flaws, verstehe ich, aber dass man Gen 6 und 7 immer so in die Ecke schiebt mit Gen 8 und 9, das feiere ich nie. I don't know, weil das sind echt solid Gens, meiner Meinung nach. Und sind für mich auch, gehören zu den besseren.
a visual flair to their animations and presentation. The Z moves in particular being some of the best animation on the 3DS.
Sie haben ihre Flaws. Wie gesagt, zum Beispiel, dass die ganzen fliegenden Pokémon dauerhaft eine Fluganimation haben. Finde ich auch nicht gut. Gen 6 musste Abstriche machen mit der Story. Klar, ne? Wäre in den Pokémon Z wahrscheinlich besser geworden, aber da hatte Game Freak, glaube ich, andere Prioritäten zu der Zeit. Gen 7 auch nicht perfekt. Ich finde die Story in Usum nicht gut. Finde aber Usum hat dafür andere Dinge besser gemacht. Gen 7 war relativ linear, Gen 6 auch teilweise nicht so krass, glaube ich, aber trotzdem. Aber to be honest, Pokémon war so gut wie immer linear. Klar, das ist kein Excuse jetzt für, dass Gen 6 zum Großteil linear war und Gen 7 ziemlich linear war, aber die originalen Gen 5 Spieler, also Schwarz-Weiß 1, die waren echt linear. Echt, echt, echt linear. Und ich bin echt der festen Meinung, dass Gen 6 und 7 einen Großteil so kritisiert werden, einfach weil sie 3D-Games sind. Und spezifisch auf Gen 6 bezogen, weil sie nach Schwarz-Weiß 2 rauskamen. Es ist halt so ein bisschen dieses. Nicht Sandwich. Sie waren nicht gesandwiched, weil es nicht beidseitig ist, aber sie werden halt so einseitig gezogen. So alles, was nach Gen 5 ist so. Ja. Ja. Ist halt so. Die hatten auf jeden Fall ihre Flaws. Gen 5 hatte auch Flaws. Gen 6 hatte auch teilweise einige Flaws, wo ich auch sage, okay, die sind teilweise an manchen Stellen echt nicht so gut. Aber insgesamt sind sie echt solid. Und dass man die in der Ecke schiebt mit jetzt, keine Ahnung, Dingern wie Schwert und Schild. I don't know. Ich finde vor allem bei Gen 7, bei Gen 6 kann man noch sagen, aber ich finde bei Gen 7 haben sie sich teilweise so viele Sachen getraut und verändert und sie sehen echt gut aus. Dass die dann in den Schandfleck von Schwert Schild geschoben werden, ist halt echt nicht gerecht so. Weil Gen 7, man kann sagen, was man will, man kann die Story nicht feiern, man kann sagen, sie sind linear oder so. Aber was Story angeht, was Grafik angeht und so, da haben sie echt nochmal, sie haben es versucht. Sie haben echt
But
Gameplay
this
gechanged und so, nicht Core-Theme natürlich, aber sie haben es versucht, so. Dass die Leute es dann nicht mochten, ist halt eine Sache, aber es dann mit Schwert und Schild in der Ecke zu schieben, ist halt nicht fair, meiner Meinung nach.
cute looping animations are a significantly bigger challenge with 3D models, especially when every Pokemon needs a bare minimum of about 6 animations for simple basic movements, attacks, reactions, etc., where the 2D sprites only relied on a couple animations for each facing, and some clever manipulation tricks to imply movement. This is why I bring up the pixel art from Gen 5, because it's quite obvious they knew how to give a ton of charm and personality to those designs because they were drawn with a 2D aesthetic in mind. So you have to assume this major stagnation problem here has to do with the transition to 3D and the amount of work and time that's required in getting that same level of life out of them, resulting in Game Freak being stuck between focusing on polish or scope. And this brings us to one of the most contentious points for Pokemon fans that could have been predicted with a bit of foresight, since animation struggles were a complication that was seen all the way back with Gen 1. During the first game's development,
Das
a
war
complication that
Vulpix?
was seen
Digga, was sind das für Sprites? Was zur Hölle?
all the way back with Gen
Oh,
1.
Kappa, du hast ja keine Augen.
During the first game's development, it was quickly realized it would have been impossible to give every Pokemon sprite unique animations for every attack it could possibly do. So Game Freak had the rather smart idea of having the attack animations placed separate from the sprites, which was much simpler to implement across the entire game since they weren't dependent on the sprites themselves, allowing for any Pokemon to hypothetically be able to use any move, but still remained visually distinct. And this worked incredibly well for them all the way up to Gen 5, where again, every generation they would gradually improve the attack animations and how they manipulated the models. It isn't just Pokemon who've relied on these animation tricks either, since nearly every monster taming RPG ever since have used a similar approach to save time on animating the same attacks differently from various creatures.
Ja.
But then we return to that pesky third dimension, and suddenly all those move animations are about 10 times more complicated to look well polished compared to the franchises who had already been doing it for a decade. Like someone going through their awkward puberty years in their mid-20s while
Das ist halt ein Argument, das verstehe ich. Das verstehe ich. Wenn man es generell betrachtet, ja. Spätestens ab Gen 6 hätten sie mehr machen können. Was Animation angeht und generell was Game Design angeht. Aber weil, ne, spätestens zu 3DS-Zeiten haben halt viele RPGs Pokémon überholt, was Qualität anging. Aber als Serie insgesamt betrachtet ist es halt immer noch Gen 6, 7, würde ich sagen, konstant auf Niveau von den früheren Generationen. Wenn man es aus anderen RPGs aus der Perspektive betrachtet, dann ja, verstehe ich, aber dann kann man teilweise sogar schon sagen, eigentlich schon in der DS-Ära gab es wahrscheinlich teilweise schon Games, wo ein bisschen mehr auf Qualität gesetzt wurde als bei Pokémon jetzt.
working at a high-end law firm.
GBA,
Ultimately, the
okay,
developers
aber
chose to continue
DS
animating moves using the
schon
same principle as
grenzwertig.
before, as it would be unreasonable to expect that they give every Pokemon a dedicated animation for every move. Not just with how many there were by Gen 6, but the amount of moves along with it. The problem, however, was that with the camera no longer locked to the back of the player Pokemon, the disconnect between the move animations and the models was much more noticeable, resulting in some fans smashing their head into walls because Blastoise's Hydro Pump doesn't come out of their cannons. What the developers did to make up for this
Da ist
was
es
to
wieder,
give
es ist
most
Sam.
Pokemon a signature move that had a more
Wir hatten gerade auch
detailed,
eins
unique
zu
animation
Smash 4.
specific to that Pokemon's
war auch
model
ganz
and
gut.
rigging, and then giving a couple basic universal animations that trigger for everything else, or have the attack animations themselves manipulate the model.
Ich verstehe immer noch nicht, warum Let's Go so gehatet werden. Ich finde die Spiele echt gut. klar, die haben mich auch ein bisschen abgefuckt beim Spielen. Hauptsächlich wegen Steuerung teilweise, aber an sich fand ich die Spiele echt für ein Remake von Gelb echt ganz gut eigentlich.
Models. Granted, some of these moves clearly got more attention than others, but the principle still stands. Even if you're copying over models
Ich
into
finde auch, sie hätten mehr machen können. Vor allem, wenn man sagt, okay, es ist ein Mainline-Game, was es ja im Endeffekt eigentlich ist. Ähm, hätten sie mehr machen können. Auch ein Online-Mode und so hätte ich gut gefunden, aber I mean, es ist halt ähnlich wie Asis in dem Fall, ne? Es hatte auch keinen Online-Mode.
every new game, that doesn't negate the work that has to go into rigging, animating, and coding in the game logic so that it doesn't break itself. So this is easily the most efficient way to do 3D animation work for hundreds of Pokemon. And before anyone starts getting heated on
Sorry, dass ich gerade so oft unterbreche, ne? Aber jetzt, wo ich das hier wieder so sehe. Warte mal.
in the game logic so that it doesn't break itself. So this is
Sorry, aber Schwert und Schild ist einfach ein 3DS-Game. Jetzt bin ich mal von der Grafik her, sondern es sieht einfach aus wie ein Sonne, Mond, ein bisschen höher aufgelöst. So, höher skaliert. Ich weiß nicht, was die 3 Jahre getan haben, so.
is easily the most efficient way to do 3D animation work for hundreds of Pokemon. And before anyone starts getting heated under the collar and furiously typing about how games like Pokemon Battle Revolution or New Snap's animations look so much better, of course they do. Frankly, I expect that they should. These games are always incredibly narrow in scale by comparison, focused solely on their main gameplay style, and typically with a fraction of the Pokédex of the modern games. Yes, new Pokemon Snap looks gorgeous as you get to watch Pokemon interact in cute ways never seen before.
Das Spiel muss ich auch
Like
nochmal
the
spielen.
Scorbunny doing a little show for their friends before having a snooze on a Torterra. But using it as an own on the mainline series isn't exactly the gotcha some seem to think it is. When you only have to make 11 stages and animate 200 Pokemon with a handful of animations that will only
Yeah.
be viewed from a single lane perspective in highly scripted events, it's noticeably easier to make it look really good. Don't take this wrong, this isn't a shit on Bandai Namco, because they did a fantastic job with the art direction and animation of new Pokemon
So wäre cool, wenn Pokémon immer so wäre, natürlich, aber es ist halt auch deutlich einfacher.
Snap. But comparing the work that they did with what Game Freak has to do is not apples to apples.
Yeah.
Considering the more involved work that has to go into a major JRPG, compared to what is effectively an on-rail shooter that you'll see everything of in sub 15 hours. This is what I mean by Pokemon being stuck between a decision of polish versus scope. I'd love if all the
Das
games had the
Stirnliederfilm
subtle
geht hart,
details
though.
and polish that New Snap had when it comes to its aesthetics. But if you want every Pokemon to have highly detailed animations for all their attacks and interactions, while still being an open world RPG, it would likely require a vastly reduced sense of scale in order to compromise for that. Meaning the first thing that would need to happen is cutting down on the Pokedex. And this is where we get into the whole national Dex crisis thing.
Ja,
For those unaware, with Pokemon Sword and Shield, the developer stated that they weren't going to be including every Pokemon going forward so that they could focus on the models and animations that were going in the game, along with better balancing the game itself, meaning over half of the 900 Pokemon currently existing weren't going to be
man sollte es eher mit anderen JRPGs bzw. Games mit ähnlicher Komplexität vergleichen. True. Also ich glaube eher mit zum Beispiel Xenoblade oder I don't know, Final Fantasy meinetwegen, wobei ich jetzt nicht genau weiß, wie da jetzt die neueren Teile quasi aussehen. Was gibt's noch? Dragon Quest vielleicht. Aber ne, selbst dann, Pokémon wäre immer noch eine größere Herausforderung. Einfach, ich glaube, wegen der krassen Vielfalt, nicht nur der Pokémon, auch der Attacken oder so. Allein das wäre schon schwieriger und das ist halt auch nicht in 3 Jahren machbar, so, ne? Ist halt wieder die Sache, ne? Ist halt wieder die Sache. Na, eigentlich würde man alles fixen können mit ein bisschen mehr Zeit.
included at launch and couldn't be carried over from previous generations, which caused a bit of a stir. And what made it worse was when it was shown how lacking some of the animations were in places and that the models were reused from previous games. Now, honestly, for whatever reason they did this, whether it was the amount of time it takes to rig and animate older models on a completely new engine, or the time constraints that the team was on, I'm of the opinion that the National Dex isn't something needed for this franchise after all these years.
Mittlerweile denke ich das auch. Also ich war zu Schwert-Schild-Zeiten, habe ich ja vorhin schon erwähnt, war ich ein bisschen enttäuscht. Oder sehr enttäuscht teilweise, dass die einfach quasi, ja, ich weiß nicht, wie viele es am Ende waren, aber basically die Hälfte gecuttet haben. Mittlerweile denke ich, okay, zum Großteil ist es okay. Ich wünsche mir immer noch, dass manche dabei wären, so wichtig. Ich finde, eigentlich sollte man immer alle Starter inkluden, zum Beispiel. Ähm, und solange es irgendwie zur Region und so weiter passt, was eigentlich auch immer der Fall ist, wie gesagt, warum ist im Galar kein Yorklev, Yorkshire Terrier? Es gibt eine Stadt namens York, da kommt der Hund her. Warum gab es im Base Game von Schwert Schild kein Yorklev so? Sowas zum Beispiel. Aber zum Großteil finde ich es mittlerweile okay, wenn man die wichtigen Pokémon und Pokémon, die zur Region passen, included. Ja.
And it being cut
Einfach weil es mittlerweile wirklich einfach zu viel ist.
was a long time coming, which Junichi Masuda said himself. So the leap to home consoles was the best time to tear off that band-aid. And look, I get it. It's completely understandable that people
Wobei ich auch sagen muss, ich verstehe es im Sinne von Scarlet Violet, das verstehe ich. Aber Schwert und Schild ist halt basically, das sind einfach die 3DS-Models rübergeportet. Im Schwert und Schild hätten sie basically eigentlich noch alles machen, rüberpacken können. Ich glaube, sie wollten es einfach nicht machen, wie gesagt, schon weil es jetzt so das erste Home-Console-Game ist. Und wenn nicht jetzt, wann dann? Ich bin mir aber ziemlich sicher, wenn sie gewollt hätten, hätten sie es auch noch in die Edition alle reinpacken können. Ab Scarlet Violet verstehe ich komplett, weil da hat alles neue Models und so weiter. Beziehungsweise eigentlich ab Arceus. Aber Schwertschild hätte es geschafft.
like shiny hunters or those that have living dexes going all the way back to Gen 3 would be frustrated about this considering the time they've spent cultivating all their work. But let's be realistic. If the developers are spending a decent amount of time rigging, animating, and coding over 400 Pokemon that only a small fraction of players will ever see or use, that's frankly a ton of resources that could be better directed elsewhere. This was a lot simpler when it was sprites, but when those 3D models have to be carried over into every aspect of the game, that same amount of detailing work has to be done for all of them. Now, to clarify, this doesn't mean I don't appreciate when a little extra effort is put into something only a few players will see.
Ich finde tatsächlich, was sie machen sollten, dass sie ein ja, Spin-off-artiges Game rausbringen, was man mit Home connecten kann, was basically ein bisschen ist wie Stadium oder Battle Revolution, Colosseum, whatever. Oder auch hier dieses, wie hieß das, was nicht ein offizielles Game ist. Das, was man im Browser machen kann. Diese Pokémon Battle Simulator da zum Beispiel. Sie sollten eigentlich mal ein offizielles Game raushauen, was so ähnlich ist, nur halt mit actually guter Grafik so. Und gutem Design. Wo man basically die Pokémon von Home reinpacken kann und quasi ein Stadium Battle Revolution hat mit wirklich allen Pokémon. Und dann kann man sich nämlich in den Editionen selbst ein bisschen mehr beschränken, wenn man quasi schon für die wirklich PvP-Spieler quasi schon ihr eigenes Game hat, wo wirklich alles ist. Dann kann man sich nämlich in den Editionen selbst auf eher, ja, vielleicht sogar teilweise noch weniger Pokémon beschränken und auch dafür ein bisschen mehr, bisschen weniger Attacken maybe oder so. I don't know. Perfekte Lösung weiß ich auch nicht, aber bestimmt. Wenn man dann noch ein extra Game für macht für spezifische Kämpfe, dann kann man bestimmt noch irgendwie ein bisschen besser umgehen mit den Main-Editionen. Aber I don't know. Vielleicht laber ich Bullshit. Kann auch sein.
Honestly, that's sometimes my favorite stuff. But when that effort is likely taking months of development time that could be better put into polishing up the work that will be present to all players, that's probably a better use of your development team. Personally, in my opinion, using the revolving door system that the devs have proposed for future games, where the roster is a mixture of new and old Pokemon that alternates with each game, is probably the easiest way for the series to maintain themselves going forward. Especially with systems like Pokemon Home being put in place to store your collection. Of course.
True, erstens das. Zweitens, hat das auch Vorteile, dass man nicht immer alle Pokémon hat. Zum Beispiel jetzt war es eher so in Scarlet Violet, ich weiß nicht, wie es mittlerweile ist, durch die Whales und so. Aber auf jeden Fall zur Anfangszeit, keine Ahnung, wie es mittlerweile ist, wie gesagt, ähm, waren halt, war halt Cramorx echt mega gut in der Meta, einfach weil kein anderes Pokémon im Game die Fähigkeit hatte, die er hatte. So, jedenfalls nicht zu dem Zeitpunkt. Und dadurch war halt, ich glaube, Strolch war die Fähigkeit, war halt Cramorx echt mega gut im Competitive so. Und das halt auch nur, ne? Einfach weil eine begrenzte Anzahl von Pokémon verfügbar ist.
Game Freak, you're really not making it easy to see your side in all this. Look, all I'm trying to say is if cutting down on the Pokemon that each game has to manage means better attention can be given to things like the story, presentation, and game design,
Home ist
I'm all
weich.
for it. Which actually brings me to yet another issue Pokemon has been facing the last few years. One of the most frequent talking points you'll see when discussing the mainline Pokemon games is how stagnant the core gameplay has become, which is valid. Since the first generation, the turn-based rock paper scissors format hasn't budged in any remarkable ways after 25 years. And there is an undeniable comfort to that, in a eating that same peanut butter jelly sandwich you would have for lunch as a kid sort of way, but it also means that if you've played one
Shit, jetzt hab ich
Pokemon
Hunger
game,
darauf.
you've essentially played them all. There have been refinements over the years, but
Ja.
at the end of the day, the series has moved at a snail's pace when it comes to evolving on its core system.
Ich denke auch. Also tatsächlich, ich glaube, sehr viele Kritikpunkte sind einfach. Es verdient auch die Kritik, ja, aber basically hätte man das immer sagen können, außer in Gen 1, wo alles neu war. Ich bin mir ziemlich sicher, die Leute, die mit Gen 1 aufgewachsen sind, werden auch Kritikpunkte gegenüber Gen 3 und 4 haben. Ich glaube, Gen 4 war nicht mal so mega beliebt, als es rauskam. Gen 5 war nicht beliebt, als es rauskam. Gen 6 war nicht beliebt, als es rauskam. Gen 7 war nicht beliebt, als es rauskam. Gen 8 wurde totgehasst. Gen 9 wird sich komplett drüber lustig gemacht. Jetzt sind wir in einer Zeit angekommen, wo Gen 5 aber mega geliebt wird, weil es einfach die ersten Generationen sind, mit dem viele aufgewachsen sind. Das wird der gleiche Fall sein mit Gen 6, das wird der gleiche Fall mit Gen 7 sein. Bei Gott bewahre mich vom Herzinfarkt, aber das wird auch leider mit Gen 8 der Fall sein. Und 9.
The Pokemon formula has
Ich will es nicht wahrhaben, aber es wird so sein. In 10 Jahren werden die Leute sagen, ey, Schwert und Schild waren die Pokémon-Teile meiner Kindheit. Das sind die besten Peak-Pokémon einfach. Das werden Leute in ja, nicht mal 10 Jahren sagen. Um Gottes Willen, hilf mir.
become so cemented into the brand that any attempts to change it or revamp it would likely require a complete overhaul to everything. So the way Game Freak has attempted to cover for this is by introducing new gimmicks each generation. This has worked relatively well in Pokemon's favor when it comes to keeping general interest in the series, but whether it's Mega Evolution, Z-moves, or Dynamaxing, Game Freak appears to be extremely apprehensive to firmly establish anything as
By
part
the
of
way, von wann ist denn das Video? Von vor einem Jahr, okay. Aber bisher kam noch nichts mit Scarlet Violet und Arceus und so.
the
darum
core
wundere ich mich.
design going forward, and would rather toss aside anything that isn't part of the original combat system after a game or two. Now, I personally like the idea that every region has its own unique gameplay features to keep things fresh and set them all apart as their own distinct areas, but now that we're in dedicated console territory, having mechanics be brought up and then dropped after a single game
Yeah.
feels like a bad use of resources. And not to mention frustrating as hell when it's a feature fans adore, like walking Pokemon. Seriously, how has that not become a core feature at this point? This is an entire series about creating a bond.
Game Freak fügt ein Feature hinzu, was gut ist, und dann wird es in der nächsten Edition gedroppt. So, I don't know. Fühle ich halt nicht so. Like, Game Freak sollte wissen, Mega-Evolutionen sind am beliebtesten. Man hatte sie in Gen 7, ja. Auch wenn keine neuen, und dann wurden sie halt komplett gedroppt. So, I don't know. Ich finde, man hätte einfach das ganze Konzept überarbeiten können. Klar, Mega Evolutions waren teilweise echt ziemlich unbalanced. Aber es wurde ja schon in Gen 7 teilweise überarbeitet. Ich glaube mit Kangama zum Teil. dass es ein bisschen genervt wurde. Man hätte das einfach weitermachen können. Statt seinen Fokus auf Dynamax zu packen und meinetwegen auch nicht Z-Moves und Terra Crystallization, wobei ich Terra eigentlich ganz cool finde, das Konzept. I don't know, baut einfach Mega-Entwicklungen auf. Macht, gibt ein paar Nerfs, gibt ein paar Buffs. Gibt vielleicht auch mal Pokémon eine Mega-Entwicklung, die actually eine brauchen und nicht nur den Pokémon, die sowieso schon stark sind. Was war nämlich der größte Kritikpunkt meiner Meinung nach? Ähm, ja. Ich finde, droppt nicht immer Features. Einfach nutzt sie und macht sie besser.
On with your partners, in which nearly every piece of marketing material is all about going on a journey with your favorites, and yet the games never commit to this.
Ja.
Okay, I'm getting a bit off track. While I could continue on about the annoying way Game Freak seems to regularly throw away new features at an alarming rate, the bigger concern in regards to this topic is how thin they've spread themselves in terms of their core battle system. Looking at the various splits in the fan base, the developers are constantly threading the needle of indulging the existing aging fan base while not alienating their target demographic of children and casual
Immer wenn
fans.
ich Dynamax
Which is
sehe,
admittedly not an easy balance to
bin ich
keep.
sofort angepisst.
Actually, another point I'll give in Game Freak's favor is how the core design of Pokemon's battle system is so simpler a toddler could learn it, and granted the games do treat every player like that's the case, but it's complex enough under the hood that you need a goddamn accounting degree to fully appreciate all the subtleties going on.
Bin ganz ehrlich, ich verstehe es immer noch nicht komplett. Also ja, die ganzen Base-Dinger und so verstehe ich und mittlerweile auch hier, was Wesen sind und so, ist ja auch relativ easy. Weiß nicht genau, die Mathematik dahinter teilweise jetzt bei Wesen, ich weiß nicht, wie viel Prozent das sind. Ich glaube 10? Sind 10% immer bei Wesen, die einen Unterschied machen? Ich weiß nicht genau, vielleicht auch 20. Ich weiß auch hier, was die Stats Raises und Decreases mittlerweile sind. Bei 50% sind es, glaube ich, immer, ne? Decrease und Increase plus pro Stufe. Aber was sowas mit IVs und so angeht, da habe ich dann auch keine Ahnung. Bin ich ganz ehrlich.
Enough so that there's an entire competitive scene built around it that the
Ganz
developers are
grob
also attempting to
ungefähr,
cater to.
aber
When it comes to JRPGs, there isn't anything remotely like
nicht im
this,
Detail.
and definitely not to the same level as Pokemon. However, this circles us back around to the original point of this video, as this layered simplicity was central to Pokemon's longevity, but it's also keeping it chained down with how it's now committed to it. Hell, between the 18 types, EVs, IVs, natures, abilities, held items, general team composition, and the entire eugenics discussion involved in breeding,
Das Battle-System feiere ich halt, ne? Dass man halt so viele Möglichkeiten hat. Also, ich weiß nicht, ob das bei den anderen JRPG ansatzweise so krass ist. Dass man so viele Möglichkeiten hat, allein mit den Pokémon, mit der Auswahl, mit den Wesen auch noch, mit den Items, wie hier gesagt wurde, ne? Dass man da so viele Möglichkeiten hat. Das ist halt auch der Grund, warum ich die Scheiße spiele.
there are a lot of smaller components that make up Pokemon's battle systems beyond its gargantuan roster, both on a casual or competitive level. So I can see how tinkering with it too much might feel like
Es ist halt einfach, es ist zu huge, dass sie es in der Zeit gut machen können.
playing a game of
Oder wirklich gut machen können. Es macht ja immer noch Spaß. Aber es ist einfach zu huge mittlerweile.
Plunk. It's pretty clear that the battle designers at the studio have been spending the last few generations trying to balance this house of cards so that it doesn't completely fall apart. Which is the
Ja.
most likely explanation for gimmicks like Mega Evolutions or Dynamaxing, as it's an add-on to the formula to spice things up without having to mess around with the core systems that fans have an attachment to and can be
Ja, hat aber irgendwie genau das Gegenteil verursacht. Ne? Also ich glaube, die modernen Pokémon sind so ein bisschen die unbalanceden. Also ich glaube, Power Crab war irgendwie, oder Power Creep, wie auch immer das heißt, ich habe gerade den Namen vergessen. Ist, glaube ich, seit Gen 6 so am schlimmsten. Also, ich glaube, ganz schlimm war es in Gen 8. To be fair. Ganz schlimm war es da. Gen 7 hatte halt die Z-Moves, die waren halt extrem brutal. Gen 9 weiß ich gerade nicht. Aber ja. Also es hat irgendwie genau das Gegenteil gemacht, was sie wollten, aber denke ich mir halt auch wieder, ne? Nehmt aber die Mega-Entwicklung, die ihr halt als erstes eingefügt habt und überarbeitet die einfach. Gibt sie Pokémon, die sie actually brauchen. Und nervt halt weiter Pokémon, die halt schon generell sehr stark sind. Macht halt einfach die Basiswerte von, keine Ahnung, noch ein bisschen lower.
Easily removed if needed.
Die
However, don't
Fähigkeiten,
take that
nervt
as
die.
me saying Pokemon's gameplay can't be improved, as there is a laundry list of extremely simple ways they could bring new life to it that don't boil down to, oh, make it real-time combat, from someone who hasn't touched Pokken tournaments since launch. For starters, let Pokemon
Ich
swap
denke auch,
around
es sollte
movesets
eher
on
ein
the
RPG
fly so that you
bleiben.
can experiment with different builds, rather than committing to one alone.
Ich finde
Why are we
rundenbasiert auch
still
eigentlich
messing
ganz
around with
okay.
this whole forget move and it's gone shit? How about incorporating difficulty scaling systems so veterans don't feel like they're crushing through the game on easy mode, but newcomers are still able to learn at a comfortable pace?
Ja, bitte.
Even just having better in-game explanations for how core
Bitte.
mechanics like EVs and IVs are handled would go a
Bitte.
long way so that players don't have to find a back alley Smogon dealer to teach them how to get the most out of these systems.
Bitte, ich will's
The
endlich
point I'm making
verstehen.
here, though, is that while it's completely understandable that some are exhausted of the same exact formula year after year that Pokemon battles have relied on for decades, it's a more complicated issue than one might think, leaving Game Freak stuck between a rock and a hard place on how to approach it going forward. I think it's a fact that if Game Freak reworked their gameplay at this stage beyond some generalized tweaks and quality of life improvements, it would very likely lead to rioting amongst fans. Whether it changed the way casuals approach the game who simply want their comfortable simplicity, or it screws the balance of competitive even more than it already is. Both sides of the fan base they want to keep happy, but tend to want contradictory things. Again, I don't think it's impossible to shake things up a bit, but when you're dealing with such a vast player base, you're never going to please everyone, especially when it comes to Pokemon, which is likely why the developers seem to prefer sticking with safer design choices that are tried and true that they can make gradual improvements to, rather than going for big risks that could potentially damage the brand.
Ja.
Frankly, I could go on forever about all of this because even digging into this topic poetically became its own nightmare with all the various routes you can go down when it comes to the design problems Pokemon has cultivated. None of this was meant to ignore or forgive the obvious flaws of the Pokemon series either. I'll be honest, it's frustrating seeing Pokemon languish this last decade because it has so much untapped potential left that the series has yet to explore. But it's clear that its issues aren't exactly
Ich muss schon sagen, ne, hier generell der Schwert- und Schild-DLC sieht schon so viel besser aus als das Base-Game.
black and white. Most of the common complaints I've seen about the series and Game Freak specifically as the developer are far more rooted in bigger issues than just making games is hard, itself not being an untrue statement. I'm sure another studio could come in and
Ja, Pokémons Probleme sind actually deutlich komplizierter als es immer scheint. So, also manche sagen immer, tun halt so, wie ich schon meinte, ja, macht es 2D, macht es schwerer und so. Ja, das fixt die Kernprobleme nicht. Klar, mit mehr Zeit geben würde auf jeden Fall schon die Performance und die Grafik und so deutlich besser sein und auch die Models und so weiter, aber andere Probleme würde es nicht beheben.
fix things like the glaring
Da muss man
optimization
halt schon mehr
issues that
denken.
Pokemon games have, but I don't think any developer could pull a complete mainline Pokemon game out of its ass with the Gordian knot of design Game Freak and the Pokemon Company have tied themselves into over the years, where a lot of these ongoing problems are interconnected and overlapping with each other. Honestly, the simplest way to fix
Ja, die-
problems
die
are
Animation ging
interconnected
actually
and
hart.
overlapping with each other. Honestly, the simplest way to fix all of them is to scrap everything and go back to square one. Something that would never happen with a series like this. What would help these games just as much, however, is actually the
Christ.
same thing that could improve literally any game. More development time.
Yeah.
Giving more time for the developers to work by pushing back the strict deadlines being set would allow the team to experiment and workshop their ideas instead of having to rush everything through production, or at the very least polish the games up a bit. Yes, the Pokemon brand is one of the most profitable IPs ever, so the company could easily toss a dump truck of money at the problem and still make millions, But even if they double their staff yet again, like they've done twice already going by reports, it's not gonna matter much. Because no matter what size of studio, attempting to pump out these games every 2 years as if they're developed in the same way as they were on the Game Boy Advance is beginning to hurt the series more.
Gebt jedem Mainline-Game von Pokémon 6 Jahre Development. Und veröffentlicht sie parallel. Also wirklich, dann bringt sie auch was. Vergrößert euer Team. Bleibt in Kommunikation natürlich. Und sagt, jo, wie ich hab Buffy was. Und sagt, jo, die einen entwickeln am Remake, bleiben aber in Kommunikation mit dem Mainline-Team quasi und dann quasi alle 6 Jahre wird dann veröffentlicht mit quasi basically alle 3 Jahre. In 3 Jahren basically Remake, dann 3 Jahre danach Mainline, wieder 3 Jahre danach Remake und so weiter und so fort. Dazwischen halt hin und wieder mal Spin-offs. Wenn man da in der Kommunikation bleibt, geht es auch eigentlich nicht schief.
And more. This had truth.
Das ist halt so eine Sache, die lief halt extrem schief an Arceus und Scarlet Violet. Was eine Sache, die man halt extrem merkt. Die Dinge, die Arceus gut gemacht haben, fehlen halt komplett in Scarlet Violet. Also ich bin nicht der größte Arceus-Fan. Aber eine Sache, die das Spiel echt mega gut gemacht hat, war das Movement. Das Movement im Game war so extrem clean und nichts davon ist basically in Scarlet Violet dabei. Nicht die Catching Mechanics, nicht die Wideable Pokémons, also schon so ähnlich, aber halt in einer abgespeckten Variante. Es ist halt, da merkt man, okay, die hatten nicht wirklich gute Kommunikation während der Entwicklung. Ähnlich bei Schwert und Schild und Let's Go. Die wurden auch gleichzeitig entwickelt. Und ich habe gestern erst erfahren, dass eigentlich bis zum Release von Let's Go keine Pokémon in Schwert und Schild in der Oberwelt auftauchen sollten. Das heißt, die ganze Naturzone und so wäre auch Random Encounter gewesen und keine Pokémon auf der Oberwelt, sondern so wie quasi eigentlich immer. So wie die ersten 7 Gens. Und erst irgendwie 3 Monate nachdem Let's Go erschienen ist, haben sich vor Game Freak gedacht, oh, warte mal, das Feature ist ja relativ beliebt, lass uns das mal in Schwert und Schild einführen. So, anstatt die das, keine Ahnung, während der Development, aber bei beiden sagen, yo, lass uns das mal probieren.
However, is that it ultimately
Zum Glück haben sie es dann hinzugefügt, aber trotzdem, ne? Erst so spät quasi.
doesn't entirely matter. It doesn't matter if the games are up to fan standards or not, or if the new Pokemon aren't as good as the older generations, or if the competitive scene of the new games aren't as strong. I'm certain most of the developers and artists who spend years working on these games genuinely do care.
Ja.
No one pursues low-paying creative work to be lazy and uninspired. But at the end of the day,
Ich denke, kein Spieleentwickler macht das ohne Herz. Keiner. Wirklich, es gibt deutlich einfache Sachen, Geld zu verdienen und auch deutlich einfache Methoden, teilweise mehr zu verdienen und schneller Geld zu verdienen, ohne Crunchen und so weiter. Ich glaube, keiner macht das irgendwie aus Geldgeilheit und so. Das sind dann eher die Finanzsektoren, die das da entscheiden teilweise. Nicht die Devs.
games are just vehicles for the Pokemon Company to sell merchandise. Going back to that earlier graph showing how much Pokemon has earned as a brand, video games only make up a fraction of that almost $100 billion profit total. Like most IPs, the real big earner is in the merchandising.
Yeah.
Even if the video games don't make up the largest chunk of Pokemon's earnings, though, they are at the center of it all. Because every new mainline entry, especially a new generation, is an entire new line of cards, anime, plushies, etc. Every time a new generation comes out, that's at least 70 to 80 new Pokemon being brought to market. Even if only 10 new Pokemon become fan favorites and the rest are just mediocre garbage, That's still a huge amount of merch potential that can be sold. Mimikyu's only been out since the last generation, but they couldn't be more over with the fans. Probably because it speaks to how we're all a little lonely. This is why new Pokemon games are put out at such a frequent rate. Consider again how we've had 13 mainline games, not counting upgraded
Mimikyu
versions,
is actually
since the
genial.
series started in the late 90s, which will be 15 as of this time next year as things are going, nearly all of which were handled by the same company. There's no franchise that has had that sort of output outside of yearly sports titles. That's because Pokemon's entire corporate infrastructure is built around consistent new game releases to maintain their bottom line across all its different revenue streams. So slowing down with the games means everything gets halted along with it. So if change is going to happen, it would likely require an entire corporate restructure and not just the games themselves. That's why when we see changes with the Pokemon brand, it's always been in these smaller increments, rather than sweeping overhauls. Longtime fans might have their gripes with them, but you can see the gradual attempts
Holy
to mix
S.
things up with the last two generations, with the Island Challenge format to Sun and Moon, and the Wild area of Sword and Shield, because it's the safest way to handle it with the time constraints they're under and the expectations over them. When developers don't have much time to test new ideas, it's hard to expect them to make daring design decisions. And I know this all sounds very defeatist. Oh, this franchise I love is yet another victim of capitalism! But it's not entirely that. I do actually have hopes for the Sinnoh games that got recently announced, especially for whatever Legends Arceus is going to be. Hell, I enjoyed Sword and Shield despite some of its flaws. This is more about critically looking at what Pokemon's success means for it as an ongoing franchise, video games or otherwise, and coming to a better
Ja, das ist nicht gut gealtert mit den Sinnoh-Remakes.
understanding of how that influences the product and those that make it. I think it's gotten very easy to be upset with Game Freak for making a mediocre game that wasn't everything you wanted, and as a consumer you have every right to be frustrated, but when you realize the overwhelming pressure they're put under, both by their fans, their corporate overlords, and yes, their poor planning, you sort of feel bad for them. But in spite of its issues, I think what's most amazing about Pokemon is how it still remains culturally relevant to this day. Many expected Pokemon would burn out hard after the turn of the millennia, but the promise of a new game still reignites millions of fans' passions every time. It's not just the mainline games either. Working on this
mich echt, wie
video
lange
made me
das noch
really
ist.
appreciate just how far Pokemon's reach has become. From fan animations to fan games, Pokemon has become so ever expansive that it'll be years before we can fully appreciate the cultural impact it's had with how much it's spread across the internet. Frankly, there's not many franchises that have been as reliable with their output as Pokemon across so many mediums, while balancing an entire online cottage industry along with it. So, while frustrations have been raised regarding the series, it's clear a lot of it comes from a deep place of love held by many. And I think it's still going to be a long ways off before people ever truly stop loving it. Anyways, thanks for watching.
Ich frage mich echt, ob Pokémon jemals aufhören wird, so erfolgreich zu sein. Also ich kann mir echt vorstellen, erst frühestens so, wenn die Leute, die damit aufgewachsen sind, so wirklich sterben, aber wobei auch immer mehr Leute damit aufwachsen. Darum, I don't know. Schwer, weil vor allem die Spiele verkaufen sich immer besser. So. Ich glaube, Gen 8 sind die oder Schwert Schild sind die zweiterfolgreichsten Spiele und Scarlet Violet schon, glaube ich, meistverkauftesten, irgendwie so. Ich glaube, nur Rot-Blau sind noch Nummer 1, aber ja, die sind auch nochmal besonders.
This was originally going to be a short opinion piece that sort of spiraled out of control on me, so I appreciate anyone for making it all the way through.
Short.
Thanks also to the channels Nintendo Unity and Mixily, who were a huge source for animations for the Pokemon game.
Alright. Gutes Video. Stimme mit den meisten Punkten, die er gesagt hat, überein, würde ich sagen. Aber nicht mit allen Punkten der generellen Pokémon-Community. Wie gesagt, Gen 6 und 7 overhated. Denke, die werden vor allem gehatet, weil, ne, Post Gen 5 und 3D-Games. Ja, aber ich verstehe schon, dass man Gen 8 und 9 nicht mag. Mir macht Gen 9 jedenfalls Spaß zum Großteil. Außer die Performance, die fuckt mich wirklich ab, also die Lags. Nicht mal die Grafik unbedingt, die Lags, die regen mich wirklich auf. Aber ansonsten finde ich, aktuell macht es wieder ein bisschen mehr Spaß als zu Gen 8 Zeiten. Wir können jetzt das Mario Kart Video machen, aber to be honest, gerade weil wir einfach so mega im Pokémon-Flow sind, würde ich gleich mal das nächste machen und das interessiert mich persönlich, aber weil ich gerade in so einer Zwickmühle bin. Nee, ich gestern den Kanal Pokémon Challengers gefunden, den abonniere ich auch mal. Da habe ich gestern schon ein Video geguckt zu Best Held Items in Nuzlocke. Und jetzt gucken wir das Video Pro Nuzlocke ranks the best Pokémon Womhacks. Und da bin ich mal gespannt, weil da wollte ich mir auch mal ein paar angucken. Habe auch schon diverse Videos gesehen. Ich habe auch schon eins, vielleicht auch zwei gedownloadet, weiß ich jetzt nicht genau, die ich auf jeden Fall irgendwann spielen will. Das Ding ist nur, die eine, die ich mir auf jeden Fall safe gedownloadet habe, ist ein Womhack von einem 3DS-Game. Und da muss ich bei Seedra halt gucken, wie ich das so hinkriege, dass es relativ gut läuft, weil, ne, Seedra ist halt immer so eine Sache. Nicht jedes 3DS-Game läuft mega gut. Anyway, wir gucken uns einfach mal an, was es so für Womhacks gibt und wie gut die alle sind. Und ich denke mal, wir werden davon auch einige irgendwann nass locken. Werden wir wahrscheinlich in letzter Zeit bei einigen Reaction Wednesdays mal hier ein paar Videos von dem Kanal geben, einfach weil, ne, die beiden Nuzlocks, die ich bisher hier auf dem Twitch-Channel hatte, habe ich beide nicht bestanden, was ein bisschen dramatisch ist. Aber naja, ich bin auch nicht der beste Pokémon-Spieler. Ich will ein bisschen mehr lernen, was Pokémon angeht. Darum, hey, vielleicht bringt der Kanal mir ja was, damit ich ein bisschen mehr vom Battle-Aspekt von Pokémon lerne. War ja immer so eher der Catcher, nicht der Fighter. Mal gucken.
What's up, boys? Hello. I still don't have a standard YouTube intro. I'm Pokemon Challenges and probably the best Nuzlocker in the world, and today we're going to be going over the best ROM hacks. For those of you who don't know, a ROM hack is a modified version of a Pokemon game that changes some things about the game. We've played a lot of these on my channel over the years, and I think it's time to kind of rate them. Couple of ground rules, I guess, and disclaimers. I have not casually played any of these except for two of them because they're a little bit different. However, they'll mostly be rated on like how much fun are these games to Nuzlocke from my perspective. The tier list will be based on how much I personally like the game, but additionally to that, I will give you like a personal recommendation to who should be playing this game and whether or not you would be having fun with this game. Oh yeah, hey guys, do you see all those cool people here? Look at all those cool people
Mein
making
Chat,
funny
danke.
memes and all those dittos. You see that? If you want to do that too, go watch my Twitch stream
Danke,
at
Bro.
twitch.tv/Pokemon Challenges to join us and watch our Twitch stream.
Twitch.tv/weird
I'm live
Anton.
like every
Digga.
day-ish. Also, you're probably not subscribed to the YouTube channel statistically, so make sure to subscribe. You're thinking right now, hey, but I am subscribed because I always get your video recommendations, but you're actually not. So go click the sub button. We're pretty close to 100K. It's pretty exciting. Go make sure to get us there. Thank you so much. Make sure to leave a like and a comment or something. I don't know. Algorithm. Okay, let's get into it. Let's go. So, oh yeah, one more quick disclaimer. There's 2 games on this tier list that I have started but not.
Guck mal, was gibt's denn hier? Kenne ich davon welche? Bloody Platinum habe ich, glaube ich, schon mal gehört. Rising Ruby. Sacred Gold habe ich, glaube ich, schon mal gehört. Renegade Platinum, ja. Void White, ja. Generell die Kaizo-Version, ja. Dark Rising, ja. Neo X, nee. Soll mal die da unten sind, keine
I'll
Ahnung.
just be rating it as of like so far. How much do I like them? Starting out with the beautiful, the amazing Pokemon Bloody Platinum. That is a old as frick game. God damn, we haven't played this game in a very long time. This game was pretty terrible. The level curve is awful. The new custom sprites are awful. Okay, yeah, Bloody Platinum, terrible
Jesus.
game, awfully balanced. The redeeming quality of Bloody Platinum, however, is the Elite Four. With its edgy, dark sprites, all the shadow forms of the legendaries. The Elite Four in this game was fun as heck to fight. It was so goddamn cool. Because the entire Elite Four just has Ubers, and you gotta plan around those. It was super exciting, I'm not gonna lie. That is actually a redeeming quality. The main thing about Bloody Platinum, though, is there is no reason to play it because Renegade Platinum exists. So I think Bloody Platinum is not F tier because it has a really fun Elite Four, and it is it's a huge difficulty increase. So if you're looking for something that's just like a massive early game difficulty increase, it can be cool. Some of the early game encounters are kind of fun, but I think for the most part, it's a horribly balanced mess of a game. Moving on to Fire Red Omega.
Ik heb
One of
Bloody
the
Platinum
many
gespielt,
Drayano
mich.
hacks on this list. In fact, every single Drayano hack is on this list, and we're going to talk about all of them in a row here. These are all made by legendary hackmaker Drayano, fantastic person. We're going to look into all of these. So, Fire at Omega was fun. It had like the cool new starters. However, it definitely shows that this is Drayano's oldest game for sure. It's got like none of the quality of life features that his newer games have. I would say the balancing isn't as good. And especially now that we're playing Radical Red right now, it's just very obvious how dated this game is. However, it is pretty fun. The early game encounters are cool. There's a lot of like starters you can get early on and stuff like that. Yeah, it's a pretty fun game. It's just nothing special really. I would put it in solidly like B tier. It's like decently difficult, but not like insanely difficult. I think if you're looking to start like a ROM hack Nuzlocke, this might be one of the better points to start at because it's decently balanced. It's got some interesting stuff and it's not that difficult. Although it's obviously a huge step up from the vanilla games, right? Oh, I guess something I should explain is that most, if not all of these games are so-called enhancement hacks. So they're like the base game, but they add a bunch of Pokemon and a bunch of features and a
Finde
bunch
ich
of
auch ganz cool.
difficulty by
Immer
making
solche
all the
Hacks.
trainer fights and all the boss fights harder. That's what almost all of these games are, including all the ones by Drayano. That's like what all of these are except for like a very select few. So we're obviously rating off of that. That's like mostly what we play on this channel, right? So if you're looking for like a decent enhancement hack that's not too difficult and doesn't have too many new features, Fire Red Omega is a great place to start. Sacred Gold Storm Silver. Now, one thing to note about this game is there is an update coming for this game to make it more in line with the features that Renegade Platinum, Drayano's newest hack, has. But I think even without the update of this game, this is
das
an
Video?
S-tier ROM hack. I think this is a fantastic
Vor 2 Jahren
hack.
schon, okay.
Even without any like
Das ist
crazy
Update selbst schon
features,
da.
Drayano somehow managed to basically make all of the fundamental flaws of Johto go away by just rebalancing the game. If you want to see why exactly I don't like Gen 2, you can click the video in the top right. This game is so good. Fantastic encounter variety. Awesome creative enemy teams. The changes of pacing by just making like very small adjustments to the story and adding a few fights adds so much to this game. It's so good. For like recommending it to people, I think this is still Drayano's best hack, and it's only going to get better with the update that's going to come out soon. Have a look out for that. Maybe wait to play it until the update is out. Make sure to follow Drayano on Twitter to see when it comes out. And yeah, this is a fantastic game. I really love this game. Moving
das
on
kann ich mir
to
vorstellen zu
Rising
spielen.
Ruby. I think this is Drayano's worst hack. It's
Jesus.
not bad. It's a fun 3DS hack. It just doesn't really add any features that you would like to see. It doesn't really change that much about the game. And I think the difficulty curve is kind of bad. It's decently difficult, and grinding on 3DS can be awful sometimes. Also, just like it's not that accessible because it's a 3DS hack. It's a cool attempt at like Drayano making a 3DS game, but I feel like this had like so much more potential. It's just that you're so limited in what you can do, right? And it kind of shows. I mean, like if you're looking for an enhancement hack of Omega Ruby Alpha Sapphire, like it'd probably go for this one. Although there's also like Rutile Ruby, right? I haven't played that one. Grinding in this game really sucks, and I think other than that, it's fine. There's just not much Drayano could have done. And I'm not a fan of Oraz in general, which is probably why I kind of look down on it a little bit. I think this is a C tier ROM hack. There's nothing like. I feel like to make a good 3DS hack, you have to go like above and beyond.
Oh, this is good.
At this point, I'm not really sure. Although I've seen some bits from Supernova Sun and Penumbra Moon that looked really cool.
What a
yeah,
good
maybe
kann
that
ich
could
auch.
be interesting. But I think for now, I just don't think it adds that much to the games.
Sehe ich gerade.
I think I would rather play a lot of other Drayano hacks. All right, Renegade Platinum is Drayano's newest hack. It has the most features, including like a little NPC that you can grind your Pokemon on, that you can EV train on. There's a thing in a lot of these hacks that we're going to talk about probably when we talk about Radical Red or Insurgents. What I want to talk about with that is feature creep and like giving the player too many options, which sounds stupid. We'll talk about that a little bit more when we get to Insurgents and Radical Red. With giving the player too many options of like EV train and remove EVs and re-EV train and change natures and change abilities and all that, you add so much to make you play optimally for when you're Nuzlocking that it becomes a bit of a chore. I didn't feel that much that way with Renegade Platinum though. It's definitely Drayano's easiest hack, I think. I would highly recommend anyone play this game. I think it's awesome. I think the few little things it adds to the story and stuff add a lot. And it's just a great ROM hack of a great game. I think it's an A tier hack. I think I have some problems with it. I think it's a little bit too easy. But I think for the most part, I would highly recommend this hack to pretty much anyone. Moving on to Volt White and Blaze Black. This is my favorite Drayano hack. I personally had more fun with this than I did with Storm Silver. It's definitely his hardest hack, for sure. And I wouldn't recommend it to most people unless you're like super advanced, but hardcore Nuzlocking, this ROM hack was so much fun. The early game of this game is so
Wegen auf dem
hard,
Level bin ich
but
ja noch
it's,
nicht.
like, so like skill cap, or like there's so much you can do and there's so many cool tricks. The encounter variety is huge and perfectly balanced. Everything, there's like so much to get. All of the double and triple and rotation battles, once you get used to them, are so fun to like vary between and get all the different strategies for it. Such a fantastic game. I wouldn't recommend it to a beginner. I would say start with Sacred Gold, Storm Silver, or probably Renegade Platinum. I love this hack so much. I just had so much fun with it. So many of the fights were so fun to do. The Lenora fight and the Berg and how brutal that stuff is. And once you get past it, you go into the mid game, and I don't know. I also just really love Gen 5, which is probably why this is so high up for me. Moving on, Volt White 2, Blaze Black 2. I only played the challenge mode of this game, which was surprisingly easier than Volt White, Blaze Black. And the early game of this is really awkward because you basically, if you play challenge mode, you need exactly like 1 of 3 encounters to get past the first gym, and otherwise you just don't get past the first gym if you're Nuzlocking. Or if you're itemless Nuzlocking, hardcore Nuzlocking, whatever. It's good. It's Gen 5. I would put it in A tier, probably below Renegade Platinum because it just doesn't have any of the cool features. I really love Black and White 2. It's my favorite like vanilla Pokemon game. I just didn't get the same sense of like really cool balance and difficulty curve that I got from Volt White, Blaze Black 1 with this game, which is why I'm putting it in A tier instead. I've never played it without challenge mode though, so without that it might be different, but still like the second and third gym leader are so much easier in this game too. All right, and then we have on this list my own hack, actually, the Pokemon Emerald Trash Lock Edition. This is obviously an S tier game. Go play it. Click the video to learn all about that. It's basically a game where we took Emerald and we took out all the good Pokemon and you can only catch bad Pokemon. It's cool. We're working on a Leaf Green version for it too. Go check it out sometime. I'd recommend it. Oh yeah. Oh, this hack was so cool. This is one of the 2 on this list that we did not Nuzlocke. I like to keep my eyes open for ROM hacks that are like weird and completely different, like conceptually, and this is one of those ROM hacks. Basically, the concept of this game is, and my playthrough of this is on YouTube, by the way, is it's just a bunch of Pokemon escape room puzzles where you're warped into a situation with like a team and like in the overworld, and maybe you can catch Pokemon or something, and you need to escape the situation with what the tools that you're given. It's like the VR missions in Metal Gear Solid. It's a really, really cool concept for a game. It's not done like perfectly or anything. I still think this has a lot of potential, but I think as like a proof of concept of like what ROM hacks don't always just have to be the exact same formula as other Pokemon games, I think it's really cool. It's a really creative Pokemon game, and I would highly recommend everyone check it out just to see like what other kinds of ROM hacks are out there. I think this is an A tier game. I think it has its flaws. It's not done perfectly. Some of the missions are really easy. But some of them are real head scratchers, and I love them. Pokemon Blue Kaizo is my favorite Pokemon ROM hack of all time. In fact, so much that I'm going to make a whole new tier for it.
No.
I think the Kaizo games by Sinister Hooded Figure are fantastic, and this game is the perfect example for it. I think Sinister Hooded Figure is an absolute genius with the way that he makes hacks, the way that he used all the existing mechanics in Gen 1 without adding anything new to make a torturous, horrible, annoying, hard as steel Pokemon game is absolutely mind-blowing. The little things that are in this game, the little like flavor designs, all like the trainer classes having Pokemon that are still appropriate to them despite also being really hard. Koga having a Mr. Mime because it puts up the invisible walls, but everything like the flavor still being second to how hard this game is, and just everything being like as annoying and frustrating as possible. Some of the routes in that game and their design, like I remember, I don't know if we can get footage of this, but I remember the path over to Seafoam Islands from Koga, and the way that was designed with like cut trees in your way, and you had to like the way that the rocks were set up. So like basically there was like 4 different paths that you could take, and 3 of them were wrong, and they were like spaced out in this perfect way where the vision would not be enough for you to see over when you took the wrong path, if the one next to it would be right. Like just these little things to make the game so goddamn annoying. I love this game. I think it's the best ROM hack of all time, and I would recommend that nobody play it. Because unless you're as like crazy as me about Nuzlocking, it's not going to be fun for you whatsoever.
Also bisher bin ich immer noch am meisten überzeugt von
I just
Platin,
don't recommend it to anyone.
Renegade,
But the way that the battle mechanics in this game worked out
Sacred
too,
Gold,
with the
und
enemy
Gold World.
AI cheating, like him moving after you, predicting all of your moves, and the enemy having infinite PP, which is 2 things that are in Gen 1 already, makes it so, and like the super high crit rate and everything, makes it so that like stalling, even though I used items in this Nuzlocke, stalling was just not a legitimate strategy, and you had to play offensive, and I love that. You had to go for like those high roll crits and play super aggressive, and God, just the difficulty curve and everything in that game is so goddamn perfect. And I think no ROM hack maker, including SHF himself, has ever gotten close to making such a uniquely difficult Pokemon experience. All right, moving on. The sequel of Blue Kaizo, Crystal Kaizo, is made by the same person with the same concept, but the problem is the gameplay thing that I mentioned about Blue Kaizo is no longer present. Enemy now have limited PP, they can't predict your moves anymore, and most importantly, you get like insane stall potential, right? You have Wobbuffet with healing items, you have Shuckle with healing items. The game is so hard that it's impossible to beat without using items, but the problem is if you use items, you just end up doing stall strats. The highlights for Crystal Kaizo are also up here on YouTube. And if you go watch them, most of the boss fights are just toxic stalling and PP stalling out opponents with like switch manips and stuff like that. That just ends up being the best strategy in Crystal Kaizo, and it's not that good because of that. It's a fun experience. It's also just not that hard because of it. It's much, despite like being conceptually similar to Blue Kaizo, it's just not as hard. It's also so goddamn long, and it's based on Gen 2. There's just so many issues. It's made with the same spirit and everything, but like the context in which it exists doesn't allow it to be as good as it could be. I still think it's a genius game. I just think that SHF should have put more effort into balancing it so that stall isn't like the only way to beat it. So I can't put it higher than B tier. Honestly, it might actually be C tier. Emerald Kaizo, I haven't finished yet. We've played it up to the 6th gym at this point. It's so fun. It's definitely an S tier game. The thing that fascinates me about Emerald Kaizo, which is why I kind of wonder about Crystal Kaizo, Emerald Kaizo is so well balanced. There's a huge variety of Pokemon you can use in the early game, and they're all kind of viable in their own way. Nothing is like completely useless. Despite you getting trash encounters throughout the entire game, the enemy having amazing encounters, it never feels like there's something that's completely unbeatable, at least up to the 6th gym. Maybe I'll feel differently about this game once we go through with it. The only criticism I have is like everything in the mid game having a Lumberry, so like induction strategies are like useless. But Emerald Kaizo has so many cool encounters. It's got so many fun Pokemon to use. It's just as hard, I would say, as Blue Kaizo, if not actually much harder. You can't use items in this game, for example, right? That's a huge thing. I wish Crystal Kaizo would have been balanced around the same thing. So far, from everything I've seen from the early and mid game, it's super well balanced. It's super fun, but it's so incredibly hard. And again, I can't recommend it. It also doesn't have some of the cool, like, little overworld quirks that Blue or Crystal Kaizo had. For example, when the first time you would go on a route, you would have to jump a ledge, and then you couldn't go back, and you would have to fight every trainer on that route before returning, right? I love that about the Kaizo games, by the way, is that they force you to fight pretty much every trainer in the game. I think that's a much better way than putting optionals in the game, and I wish more ROM hacks did that and balanced around that. It also makes, like, if you're playing with level caps, it means that you have to do much more, like, experience management and stuff like that. The encounter design in Emerald Kaizo is just phenomenal. It's so good. Moving on, we have one of our favorite little games. I actually haven't finished this game yet either. I'm pretty sure we got to the 6th gym or something in this game. Pokemon Dark
Ich hab gehört, es
Rising.
soll scheiße sein.
Oh my god, this game. If you go back and watch my highlights of this run on YouTube, there's a lot of things that stand out. It's not an enhancement hack. It's a custom game, custom story, custom map. But goddamn, is it awful. The balance in this game is so
Oh my.
terrible. The level curve is garbage. Grinding is so horribly unoptimized, and you have to do so much of it. You get the same encounters every single run because it puts the same OP static Pokemon everywhere. Garchomp is a starter, Intimidate Archeops, but you need to pick those because your enemies use pseudo-legendaries by like the 3rd gym. So, because of the way the level curve works and everything. Not to mention the absolute hilariously cringy writing in this game. The story was written by a 13-year-old, and it's exactly how it plays.
Oh mein
And
Gott.
so is the dialogue. It's so goddamn funny, and honestly, it adds actually a little bit of entertainment value. It's also just broken. Like, there's a lot of bugs and glitches in the game. A lot of the scripts don't work properly and all that. It's a horribly put together ROM hack. Never finished it, so hey, maybe the end game of this game is really good. I'm never gonna know because I'm never touching this game again. It's a huge pain in the ass to Nuzlocke. Go check out my playthrough, I guess, if you want to at least see the funny dialogue moments, but stay as far away from this game as you possibly can. Way too many rivals, way too many self-insert characters, way too many evil teams, and the story is so cringe. Speaking of cringe,
Irgendwie will ich
self-insert
spielen,
shit, Pokemon
deswegen.
Neo X is like an enhancement hack of Pokemon X that adds a little bit of dialogue to the game, and all of it is hyper cringe. It's so funny. I think this is the worst enhancement hack that I've ever played. The balancing is horrible. It's super lazily made. Like, a lot of trainers were just forgotten to be changed. None of the like boss fights are super interesting. Some of the double battles, I guess, are cool, but the encounter variety isn't even that interesting. Grinding is horrible. Like, absolute complete, like the worst grinding in any Pokemon game I've ever had to do.
Ich sehe gerade hier, der Chat da redet hier von Eternal X. Und hier Virgin, Neo X, Chart, Eternal X. Tatsächlich ich habe ja gesagt gerade eben, der ROM, das ich fast schon probiert habe auf Citra, tatsächlich war das Eternal, beziehungsweise es war nicht Eternal X, sondern Wilting Y. Das ist ja basically das Gegenstück davon. Und da habe ich gespielt bis zum Wald, um zu gucken, ob es funktioniert. Es laggt noch teilweise, darum muss ich noch gucken, ne? Aber bis dahin war es echt ziemlich cool, muss ich sagen. Also es könnte echt eine ganz gute, optimale oder optimierte Version von XY sein, worauf ich mich echt freuen würde, weil, ne, wenn ich eine Sache an XY kritisiere, dann ist es einfach, dass es halt nicht schwer ist. Klar, Nuzlocke und so sind immer was anderes, aber trotzdem so. Ich würde ganz gerne einfach mal so an sich eine schwierige Variante von dem Game haben und das könnte das maybe sogar sein.
It's not fun. It's not interesting. It's I heard Eternal X Wilting Y is better. Maybe those are good, but Neo X and Y, the
Shines.
type changes in this game, the changes to Pokemon, there's so many, and they're all so stupid and make no sense. Every other Pokemon suddenly is a fairy type for some reason. Like every Pokemon has to have like its types changed and everything. It's so overboard. It's so like there's no restraint, and like in some points, and then other points there's just no effort put in whatsoever. And it's just, it needed to go through like 17 more
Hier
iterations.
sagt einer im Chat, I never play normal X after playing Eternal X. Das ist schon, das heißt schon was, ne?
To be like a decent ROM hack. It's not as bad as Dark Rising though. It had at least a few interesting fights and stuff. Pokemon Insurgents is the other non-enhancement
Da
hack
freue ich mich echt
fan
richtig schon.
game on this
Wird
tier.
aber nicht das nächste
And
sein, das sage ich
honestly,
jetzt schon mal.
if you're watching this and you're looking for a cool ROM hack to play, you're probably going to enjoy Insurgents. A lot of what I say about Insurgents, by the way, is also going to apply to Radical Red, which we're going to talk about in a little bit. Another game that I haven't quite finished yet. I just got past the 6th gym on stream. YouTube videos for that are coming soon, probably. Insurgents adds a ton of features. Everything, all Gen 7 mechanics. It's a whole custom story, custom region. It adds new forms for Pokemon, new megas. It adds so many features. And honestly, they're surprisingly good. The Delta forms are surprisingly cool. The new megas are surprisingly cool. Nothing is horribly imbalanced. My problem with Insurgents is very similar to my problem with Radical Red. If you're nuzlocking it and trying to play as good as possible on like the hardest rule set with like not using items, using set mode, blah blah blah, no items in battle, no over leveling the next gym leader, which Radical Red forces, by the way. When you're doing all that, Insurgents just becomes this like boss rush mode, right? It's a very long game with a ton of boss fights in them. And there's nothing in between them. None of the routes are interesting. Oh god, the story of Insurgents is so cringe. I'm sorry. Like, Dark Rising was written by a 13-year-old. That's fine. My problem with Insurgents is that it takes itself incredibly seriously and implies in the text of the game that it's like way cooler than other Pokemon games. But the problem is it's just as cringy. One of the first lines of dialogue in this game is a character saying completely unironically, "You're not even my real dad." And I think that tells you everything you need to know about this game's story and dialogue. It's incredibly unnecessarily edgy. So completely
Aber ich glaube,
like,
ich hätte
it
Spaß
takes
mit diesen
itself way
ganzen
too
cringe
seriously.
Checks.
The jokes don't land
glaube,
at all
ich
for
find
me.
das so cringe,
It's got a
dass
lot
es
of
schon wieder
really cool
lustig
features, and
war.
I think you should check it out. I just didn't like the boss rush nature of like, because of all the features that it has, kind of like what I was talking about with Renegade Platinum. You can change your natures, your EVs, the abilities on every Pokemon. So to play optimally, what you end up doing is, okay, what's the next boss fight? Time to optimize my team and their EVs and their natures and their abilities and their movesets for that for like 6 hours. And once I'm done with that, I'll do a boss fight and then I'll go back, reorganize a new team. Because you can grind for free too. There's like auto trainers and shit you can just grind on in all these games. And it just makes like reorganizing your team so free that you have to like super plan out, because there's so much shit to get, so many features, so many like different movesets you can use on your Pokemon, that Insurgent specifically is just this like way too long boss rush mode of a game. And I wish, if you're gonna like, if I want to play a game like that, I wish there was a ROM hack out there that was just like Pokemon Stadium style, just battles. Here's all the tools, here's all the Pokemon, here's all the EVs you can set, here's all the moves. Make a team for it, good luck. And that's just the game. There's no routes, no story in between. That would be a cool game. But yeah, like this, it's just like boss fights, and everything else feels like a waste of time in between. And that's how I feel about Insurgents, which is why I'm gonna put it in C tier. However, it's like the opposite of Blue Kaizo. I really don't like this game, but I highly recommend that you go play it. Pokemon Radical Red is very similar to Insurgents. Like I said, I haven't finished it yet. I'm not sure what the late game is like, but I think it's pretty much on that level, except it doesn't have the entertainment value of the super cringy story, and like it doesn't have all the creativity behind like making like the new region and stuff, which is why I'm going to put it in low C tier here as well. So far, it has a lot of really cool features, up to Gen 8 mechanics. It's basically Pokemon Fire Red, but it has up to Gen 8 mechanics. And a lot of cool new stuff added, even new megas added and everything. There's raid battles. It's very impressive on a technical level, and I respect that. I just think for my Nuzlocke experience, it's not good. It's another game that I think I hate, but I think you will really like if you go play it as like a casual player.
Ja, das kann ich mir auch
And
vorstellen,
then
dass wir das mal
lastly,
spielen.
we have Pokemon Red Battle Factory, which is literally just Pokemon, like a Battle Factory mode for Pokemon Red. It's just a ROM you load up and you're in the Battle Factory, but it's Gen 1, like the Battle Factory and the Battle Frontier in Emerald, but it's Gen 1, so you play with rental Pokemon, you can fight bosses. It's a cute little hack, nothing special, nothing too cool. It's like a cool proof of concept. Again, I like these ROM hacks that are just like not traditional like Pokemon adventures, but just like little cool different things, kind of like Fire Red VR missions. This is a cool game. You should check it out. It's Gen 1, so the rental Pokemon variety is just not as high, but this was a fun little game to play. That's all the ROM hacks that I've played. That's like my recommendations. This is how much I like them. I guess I told you whether or not I recommend them individually. Let me know down in the comments about how wrong I am about all these, and also make sure to recommend some other games that you think we should play on this channel. If you're a new ROM hack creator, maybe take some of these concepts and try to work something out. I really, really like ROM hack games that are just not just traditional Pokemon games, but like try to do something completely different with the game. I think that's really cool. Thanks for watching. If you're on YouTube, make sure to hit the subscription button, outro, call to action, your percentages, subscription. You're not, hit the bell. Bye.
Ja, war ganz cool zum Sehen. Ich glaube, jetzt war nichts Besonderes zum Reacten. Habe ich halt nicht vorher gewusst, ne? Ähm, Trotzdem ganz gut, I guess. Hat auf jeden Fall ganz guten Einblick gegeben. Wahrscheinlich werde ich ein paar davon spielen, vor allem so Dinger wie die oberen, ne? Renegade Platinum und so, Sacred Gold. Aber wahrscheinlich nicht in naher Zukunft, weil wir noch andere Dinge davor machen. Zum Beispiel Blattgrün als nächstes. In welcher Form? Muss ich mir noch überlegen, weil mit No XP und so habe ich auch noch nicht wirklich herausgefunden, wie man das alles macht. Tatsächlich wüsste ich da, wie man Gen 5 macht, aber Gen 5 hatten wir erst, ne, vor einer Weile. Darum, I don't know, wann wir das wieder machen. Da kann ich mir auf jeden Fall vorstellen. Anyway, wir sind jetzt fast bei 3 Stunden. Ich könnte noch ein Video machen, aber ich glaube, das ist mir dann ein bisschen too much. Dann würde ich heute ein bisschen früher beenden. I mean, 10 Minuten Unterschied macht jetzt keinen großen Unterschied, I guess. Morgen ist dann Donnerstag. Mal sehen, was wir da machen, ne? Mal sehen, was wir da machen. Wir hatten ja schon ein paar Ideen. Ich glaube, Freitag gesammelt dafür. Freue ich mich auch auf jeden Fall drauf. Alles klar, dann würde ich mich jetzt erstmal verabschieden. Ich mache mir hier kurz wieder Fullcam. Heute wieder ein bisschen weniger. Ich denke mal, fürs nächste Mal suche ich mir dann auch mal ein bisschen andere Videos raus, ein bisschen diverserer Content. I don't know. Vielleicht auch mal was außerhalb vom Gaming-Bereich. Da habe ich auch schon ein paar Vorstellungen, was man da machen könnte. Aber ich will lieber noch nichts sagen, bevor ich mich wieder irgendwie, keine Ahnung, täusche und dann nichts mache davon. Und naja. Anyway. Morgen, dann Donnerstag. Ungefähr wieder zur gleichen Zeit, schätze ich mal. 18 bis 19 Uhr irgendwie so. In dem Dreh. Morgen tatsächlich auch wieder Gaming dabei, ne? Also morgen machen wir ein paar Tests und so. Maybe Tierlist. Muss ich noch überlegen, was wir davon alles machen und welche. Donnerstag ist ja immer mal ein bisschen verschiedener Content. Da ist ja nichts wirklich krass fest. Ja, verabschiede mich. War heute ein interessanter Stream für den ersten Weaction Wednesday. Ich würde nicht sagen perfekt. Insgesamt würde ich sagen, ja, eine 6,5 von 10. Für mich würde ich jetzt erstmal sagen, fand vorhin die ersten beiden Videos ganz cool. Das letzte war halt, ja, ne. Ich glaube, ich sollte eher bei Essays bleiben, was dann so Reaction angeht. Nicht so wirklich irgendwelche anderen Tierlists und so. Merke ich mir auf jeden Fall. Ja, wie gesagt, ich hätte ja auch noch anderen Content gehabt zum Reacten, aber ist jetzt ein bisschen too much, glaube ich. Aber die erste Woche oder die ersten Wochen sind ja generell immer ein bisschen, naja. Man guckt, wie man sich verbessern kann. Alles klar, ich sag ciao. Und bis morgen wieder 18 bis 19 Uhr. zum Donnerstag. Ich freue mich schon. Das wird lustig. Bye, bye.